Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. We are on episode 116. Jesus Christ. Just my gratuitous display of will that I call a show. Thank you for joining me for this show. It is early in the morning. It is very early in the morning. As you guys know, I'm an insomniac. And so I'm wide awake. That is usually a good thing in the mornings. I hope you guys are doing good. I want to give a shout out to the chat. Shout out to the early morning risers, General Choi, Diane Thomas, Wraith 636. What is this? 88 Hey Hi Opay, Alexander G. Shout out to all of you and thank you for joining me this early morning. Deborah Wilson, shout out to you. Big news taking place today. Donald Trump is having a conversation with Vladimir Putin. Trump is having a conversation with Putin. And if you're wondering, okay, well, what are they going to talk about in this conversation? Well, Trump has spilled the beans in the conversation he wants to have, or he assumes that they're going to be having. I will let Trump himself tell you what they are apparently going to be talking about. Russia is being more cagey about this. But if Trump is letting the cat out the bag, then fair enough, we'll accept Donald Trump letting the cat out the bag. I would imagine that Ukraine does not want to hear this.
Power plants.
But they're effectively stuck with what Trump is saying here.
Concessions will you be seeking to have Putin make to get a deal done?
Well, I think we'll, be talking about land. It's a lot of land. It's a lot different than it was before the wars, And we'll be talking about land. We'll be talking about power plants. That's up, it's a big question. But I think we have a lot of it already discussed very much by both sides.
You'll ask him.
Ukraine and Russia.
You'll ask him, concessions will you be seeking to have Putin make to get a deal done?
Well, I think we'll, be talking about land. It's a lot of land. It's a lot different.
This will focus on what Ukraine will lose, on what they would lose. This is according to the New York Times. Ukraine is going to be dismembered. Ukraine is going to be dismembered. Those territories that are under the Russian Constitution will stay that way. If what I suspect is going to happen is that Russia stops at a certain point saying, okay, let's have ceasefire talks. Let's talk about negotiations. What land do you require from us? Okay, well, land that we already have, we are keeping. Now, there may be leeway in that. I have no idea what Putin is willing to give in order to end the conflict. But it echoes of the Yalta Conference in 1945, American and Russian leaders will talk Tuesday about who gets what in the process of ending the Ukraine war. Some people even talked about Odessa being part of that conversation in the ports. Russia has not taken Odessa. So that would be something that will be provided, maybe in exchange for something else. I don't know. I can only go by what Donald Trump is saying here. And considering that if NATO is off the table and we're having a conversation about land, okay, we're almost there. We're in the process of killing off the Ukrainian military. So we're demilitarizing the Ukrainian military with every person we shoot in the face. We're nearly at a deal. So the catch becomes, can Trump seal the deal and turn around and sell that deal to Europe and sell that deal to Ukraine? Now, the reporting is that Ukraine has already accepted that there will be concessions in regards to the territory. This is according to the Independent. This is according to the Independent. I need to find the article, but it's there. If that is true, then we are almost there. We're almost there. This is a good thing. I'm super curious on what Mark thinks. But the fact that the principals are having a conversation trying to find the exact article. Now, I will tell you, from the standpoint of Zelensky, well, he's gone rogue. He's gone rogue. And again, you may have certain Ukrainians that come out and say something hardline. They will do that. That will happen. I'm curious on how long that lasts. I'm very curious on how long that lasts. So right, Kiev is reportedly preparing to cede territory as part of the ceasefire negotiations. This is citing high-level sources briefed on the ongoing negotiations. Now, we'll see again if they hold on to that. Okay, the article has changed. I'm sorry, the article didn't change. Citing high-level Ukrainian sources briefed on the ongoing negotiations. This is according to the Independent. So, we'll see. We'll see. I'm curious on what Mark has to say about this and whether or not Mark is optimistic, cautiously optimistic. Whether he's disbelieving, we will see. My question, and I don't mean this to be brutal, but I'm asking this because I asked this at the very beginning when this first started. What was it for? What was it for? You've lost 20 to 25% of your territory. The US president and the country that pushed you into this, that led you down this particular pathway, that overthrew the government in 2014, we are now pulling guns. You've lost 25% of your territory. You've lost nearly 1 million men, not to mention untold number of men that have been damaged and brutalized in this conflict, meaning missing limbs and everything else. Millions have fled. Your economy has been destroyed. You've lost some of the most wealthiest parts of the country. What was it for? That is a damning question, but the question needs to be asked because I don't want this nonsense to happen at some future date in some other place in the globe, or for that matter, happening back here. Again, in a few years with a different administration, there's different priorities, that is perfectly okay with leading the next gang of idiots down the garden path to destruction and bringing the world to the brink of it while they do it. I'm asking, what was it for? Because I don't want to do this again. It's outrageous. And look, to make the point clear, there were attempts at negotiations, and they were legitimate on the Russian side. But as Boris Johnson, in a moment of honesty, a shocking moment of honesty, because the man lies like just a habitual liar. Listen to what Johnson says here. And he's right, by the way.
You got to remember that Volodymyr Zelensky is not, he's not an unreasonable guy. He got elected really as a peacenik.
Hmm.
He was out that, 2019, he tried to do a deal with Putin. As far as I can remember, his basic problem was that the Ukrainian nationalists couldn't accept the compromise, and you can see why not.
So they had a deal. Zelensky came in as a peacenik. He couldn't get the hard right that we put in office in 2014 to go along with the deal. What Boris is missing here is we put in the hard right that Zelensky could not bring on to a peace deal. He's acting as if this is something separate and distinct. Boris Johnson was instrumental in 2022 going in, effectively saying, you're not going to get a deal, you're not going to get a negotiations. We talked about two different negotiations. Zelensky got in as a peace candidate. I'm not going to go to war. I'm going to unravel these sanctions against Russia. We don't need to be at war with Russia. And as Johnson points out, the team of goons that were in at the time that we put in was not going to accept any peace overtures from Zelensky or anybody else. And there would have been a bullet with Zelensky's name on it if he would have tried to push through those terms. Don't blame the Russians on this. We put those idiots in. We put those thugs into positions that they ended up in, where in their mind, we must go to war with Russia in order to get into NATO. Arestovich says it extraordinarily plainly in very plain language. We knew that taking this path of NATO would lead to a war. And we did it anyway, because we believe this was our trial by fire that needed to take place for us to be part of Europe. They say it openly. It's not like the stuff fades off the internet. It's there. And so Johnson, in this case, is being something more honest. Yeah, there was no way they was going to get a peace deal. In terms of Zelensky getting elected, those same goons were in office when Zelensky was trying to get the deal, the Istanbul agreements. When Johnson jumped into the country and said, cut it off. You're not going to go through with this. You're not going to get overtures or security guarantees from us. Stop. We give you all the money. We gave you all the weapons. You're going to go or you're going to fight and you're going to die. And they did. They went and they fought and they died. If you want to say bravely, fair enough, but dead nonetheless. And when I asked this question of what was it for, 3 years, several months into a conflict that never needed to take place, that was purely because of NATO expansion, and that they lost. My hope, my dying, well, I'm not going to say dying, but my driving hope is that Trump settles this in a deal, sells it to Europe, and puts it into some law where this is effectively over with. I'm going to bring in my guests. I am joined, there we are. I am joined with Kofi Kwaku, an added to the stage. He is a senior research fellow at the Center for Africa-China Studies in the University of Johannesburg. Kofi, welcome to the show, man. How you doing today? You doing all right?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Oh, man.
I was just listening to you, and I just thought about, Russian roulette. These guys are playing Russian roulette, aren't they?
With the world.
We know who's going to win.
With the world. I mean, like under Joe Biden, and Kamala Harris could have won, by the way. They would have kept going. They would have kept plugging away at a losing campaign. And look, I would tell you, in chess, trying to win a lost game is a loss. Trying to win a drawn game is a loss. Meaning you were losing. It was clear that you were losing. And nobody would come to any kind of honest assessment of, all right, let's cut bait. We need to stop this. We're bringing ourselves at odds with 2 nuclear powers. This is not where we need to be as the United States. Yeah. I am not a fan of Trump. I didn't vote for Trump. But if he ends the war, thank God. Yeah. That's how I feel. How you doing? You doing okay today?
We're doing okay. The sun is really shining nicely here in Pretoria, but I can see the rain coming up later at night, and we've been blessed with great rain. We're happy.
Very cool. So I contacted you because I think we don't get enough subjects that are Africa related. And I think Africa is going to be a power coming up in the new world and the way that the world functions, especially if they start working together in tandem with each other, using their own resources, those type of things. And so I do think they're going to take more prominence in the world. And so my thought was, I need somebody to discuss this stuff. And you are fantastic at doing so.
Thank you.
One of the interesting things that I've noticed and that you pointed out was that ECOWAS was trying to make amends with the Sahel states that broke away from that same ECOWAS. And that at one point, ECOWAS was threatening on behalf of France. Just astonishing. It's like we're going to get Black people to go after other Black people. What is going on with this? And are those overtures going to be accepted?
Look, they've been trying as hard as they can, especially the other 12 or 14th of the left in this deal members, but they're just failing. And I think when you look at the data points and the reality on the ground, it's a worthless exercise to try to bring these 3 countries back. And clearly, it's even becoming delusional, where you have so many people being sent. First of all, I know it's a tough word for me to say, but you have the young president of Senegal, Diomaye Faye, and then you also have the president of Togo, Eyadema. These 2 are trying their best, and more recently, the new president of Ghana, John Mahama, who was elected last year. He just took over now. He started on January the 7th of this year. And about, let's say, 22 days down the line, those 3 countries officially ceased to be members of the community. the ECOWAS, Economic Commission for West African States, and there is no really value proposition that these countries will accept readily, because any value they're going to bring is not going to make sense at this stage, because those three countries know that they were threatened by ECOWAS, backed by France, but also NATO in the background,
Right.
and all these European countries, because they were losing out on the wealth that they've been siphoning off from these three countries. And these three countries, you take the two giant, Mali, it's about 1 point something million square kilometers. You take Niger, it's also the big 1 point something million. Chad is also big, these are three huge countries. Of course, part of the country is a desert. But what is extraordinary, and I must say this, I found out, and most recently, but I didn't make the connection, but the connection was already made by an analyst, a French analyst, by the way, saying that apparently the combined gold reserve of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger is much larger than the gold reserve sitting in Fort Knox in the United States. That's astounding. And so when Muhammad goes there and trying to convince them to come back, there's very little value proposition for them to go back and meet what? They're now trying to create a monetary union. They're going to come out with their own currencies. Apparently it's going to be called the Sahel. It hasn't been completely officialized. But if this Sahel comes up as a currency, it's going to be backed by gold. And as you already know, the history of Mali and that region, the Malian Empire under the great Kanka Musa, the emperor was there, who went to Mecca with tons of gold and who crashed the gold market for decades there. Apparently, the gold that's in that region really hasn't been exploited enough. They're finding more golds. In fact, the recent research that came out in the whole West Africa, running from Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, Mauritania, Senegal, and then a larger part of the southern part of Algeria, is full of gold. And this is not just gold that you have to dig very deep, but it's sort of superficial gold, so it makes it easier. And so this region is going to be another scramble. It's going to be target for another scramble. But coming back to Ghana and then ECOWAS and then of course Mali, Burkina Faso, I think President Muhammad went on a really frivolous trip. He spent taxpayers' money for nothing. I think the young president of Burkina Faso, 36 years old, very quiet and respectful, who attended the inauguration of President Muhammad of Ghana with his pistol charged right on his right hand side, saying, wait a minute, you come after me, I'm going to deal with you. In any case, it was polite to receive him with, courtesy and all this decorum and so forth. But so he came out empty-handed, and he's not going to be writing another report to the ECOWAS leader telling them, look, there may be hope, but so and so. So that is the point of it. And these three countries are steaming ahead. They're doing extraordinary things. Of course, they're still struggling with, managing efficiently the territories because of terrorists, but also the geographic size of these countries is huge. Mm-hmm. But we understand Russia is helping. China is also helping. And there was some kind of rumor that Iran, but also North Korea, were also trying to help. Yes, very interesting development. The Chinese are there. It's a place, West Africa, people are not talking much about it, but things are really happening. In Guinea, they're now almost about to open a railroad that's going to, of course, siphon off, iron ore right up from what's a mountain called Futa Jalon. Very, very interesting issue. It's still about what is called, there are two ways to call it, resource nationalism. That's the old way, which means, you make sure that the resources of your country serves you. A little bit like a bit of a MAGA light, but on resources. Or it's also called resource sovereignty. That's the new words that are now being used.
So, okay, so ECOWAS is a no. And I don't blame them, right?
No.
I mean, at the point where you're saying if you leave, you're going to get military attacked by France, it's kind of hard to come back from that. Like you're threatening to kill us if we leave. And now you're like, hey, I know he threatened to kill you at one point. We were just joking. We would love to have you back. It's like, dude, stop. It's like, stop. You've lost us. Now it begins to become the relationship that they can have with ECOWAS, because they still are there geographically. They still have to engage and interact with these countries.
They do interact. There's no really, I mean, they've managed to, the Sahelian state, those 3 states, based on their alliance, the document of their alliance are very clear. Anybody from ECOWAS can still enter their country without having a visa or whatever it is. So they're making it attractive for other countries also to dissolve from ECOWAS. But you remind me, what you just said now remind me of an abusive husband, So in this case, it's ECOWAS. He beats his wife or his 2 wives or 3 wives. And then they said, wait a minute, we can't take this anymore. We're just going to have a coalition. We're going to be on our own. So if you come and try to beat us, we're going to defend ourselves. But we're not going back. But the abusive husband said, no, I want you to come back. This is where we are.
Yeah.
And he ain't going to happen.
Yeah, beach.
That's right.
That's why they do it. I'm curious. So you told me the last time that you were here that they paid off their loans. And
yes,
it's fascinating that they were able to do that, considering the previous governments couldn't do it. Like at some point, now that they paid off the loans, what are they able to do with the increase? I would imagine money that they have at their disposal. They're not paying interest. They're not paying any of these things. So what have they decided to use the resources that they've been able to?
Oh my goodness! I mean, this is another side. I mean, this is where most of these democracies, at least the leaders who came through what's called democratic ballots, really were disappointing. That they couldn't manage, and it's going right through across the whole Africa. Well, not just Africa, but even in the United States. Doge is now telling us that, my goodness, misplaced money or fruitful expenditure is the ball of the game in most countries.
Yes.
And it was worse in Mali, and it's still worse in many of these countries. I mean, the debt of Cote d'Ivoire, it's just outrageous, as much as the country is growing at 6 or 7%, but the debt is just huge. So they have to pay. But what is interesting between Mali and Burkina Faso is that now they're getting a bit of cash. They have hard money, not just talking of paper money or fiat that they can just borrow or at very expensive interest rate with loan sharks of the World Bank and the IMF and the Club of Paris and London and so forth. And this is what's really pissing off most of these donors or these funders, because they can't get a hold of these people anymore. So the leftover money they have, I mean, they have so many social issues that they must deal with, extreme poverty, unemployment rising among the youth, inequalities where wealthy people have so much that, the others don't have much. Also the infrastructure, Jamal. And they need to build. So the president is using that money, especially for agriculture in Burkina Faso. This year, he bought about 400 and more tractors for agriculture. He managed to build a refinery for gold. They produced last month, I think, or this month, their fresh new gold bars produced in Burkina Faso. This is almost unbelievable, a no-no. And Mali's doing the same thing, and they have social programs that they're dealing with to put women and the youth into play to do some work for the country, but also the education, because most of these countries have sort of subsidized education, so you don't have to pay to go to school. And they're looking at all these issues, and that's where the money is going to basically go. And it is clear that these military guys are serious. In fact, they've been now, not court-martialing people, but the justice system is getting so tough that corrupt leaders are now knowing what they face if they stole the money.
Oh, they see it coming. I see. Let's get to South Africa for a bit. I'm fascinated by this. And I guess part of my fascination is that Elon Musk, white South African, moved to the US, he's not American. I guess he is, but he's not. And I'm saying this to be brutal intentionally. I've met 2 or 3 South Africans, white South Africans. One of them didn't seem to like the fact that apartheid ended. Like, he just openly just didn't seem to like it, and thought that the country was worse off because apartheid ended. Now, I found this to be an astonishing point of view, but that was his point of view, right? Elon Musk, I don't know what is in his mind. The Hitler salute was problematic to me, especially considering South African and the tenor that Trump has taken on South Africa. I know Trump knows nothing about South Africa. So the fact that he's taking that tenor, I'm assuming it comes out of Musk, not Trump as an individual on his own. I'm assuming that Trump is a stalking horse for what Musk thinks on South Africa. And the policy that Donald Trump is going through with South Africa is coming out of Musk, not Trump. So that's why I'm fascinated by this, because I don't think Trump would be doing this if Musk wasn't in the picture. Give me your take on that. That there's a white South African whispering sweet nothings into the president's ear that is influencing the relationship between the United States and South Africa on policy that is specific and a sovereignty issue for South Africa. Give me your take on this.
Look, I'm glad that you've identified and isolated Elon Musk. He's not the only one. I mean, if you took David Sachs, even Peter Thiel, through the vice president, so there's a large network around the president who managed to really capture it nicely. And this is something that very few people ever thought would happen, that a group of white South Africans, well off, will be able to start to sort of sneakingly, move into power in the United States and decide policy and change the world of Americans and of the world. And it's now happened. He's not the only one. The grandson of Pete Botha, called Roloff Botha, who's also a connection to what they call the PayPal mafia, but as well as Elon Musk and David Sachs and so forth. That grandson, quite smart guy, but of course, there's this sort of resentment about having been white or being white in South Africa for having lost power, that sort of racial part of it, and finding that it's very difficult to recapture it or to be treated or called as boss. Here they say boss, it is a true psychological nightmare for many of them. And some of them come on TV, on radio, and they say it. So a little bit like in the US in the old days, or even today, where the language in the old days was, to use your term, very brutal, rough, uncouth, direct, straightforward. Now it's couched into all kinds of things like DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. We don't want that. Or here in South Africa, they will call it triple BE, which is Black, economic empowerment issues, where they're trying to redress the situation. But this kind of thing was hijacked by a whole bunch of other people, Black people themselves, take advantage of it. So it didn't work well. It hasn't worked well for the majority of people. This is exactly where we're facing these things. But to come back to your point, is that Elon Musk, frankly, what does he have to prove now? He's going to Mars. He's sending, you see what I mean? He's sending all kinds of things. So he just loves to be there in the White House with his kid or kids, whatever it is. And these are pictures that will be there for posterity. So he's taking advantage of it. And there are a lot of talks that he may not last. It could be possible, because when things start to get tough, and you've seen him and the President Trump have been saying, look, it looks like people are trying to break us apart. They're trying to create some kind of tension between us. And they know that's going to happen. And I don't think Elon Musk is going to be there for a long time. If he's smart enough, he'll do his Doge stuff and then just pack his bags and go take care of Tesla, who is now under threat because people are now, I'm sure you've seen the boycott. People are burning Tesla cars. They're attacking them. And him himself have said on Joe Rogan's show that he's worried about his own life and security because if he's really successful at Dodge, he will be dead. That's an astounding statement to make.
Yeah,
So
I don't know if she'll be dead, but I do
it's going
agree
to
with
be,
you that a bad
yeah,
look adversely affects his business. Like if
yes.
people are looking at you a particular way and say, okay, this guy's a Nazi, this guy's a Trumper, this guy's a whatever, it damages your ability to do business in the US. So on that part, I definitely agree with you. What is happening in South Africa in regards to this relationship? Because you pointed out that this was big news in South Africa, or what is taking place between the US and
Well, the big news, the big hot news now here is the persona non grata signal sent to the ambassador of South Africa, Ibrahim Rasool, in Washington, D.C., to pack his bag last Friday and leave in 48 hours somewhere on Monday, which has happened already. Now, there was a seminar I attended online myself by a think tank, very reputable think tank, and they were looking at what are the implications of the new, Trump administration? What does that mean for South Africa? In the view of all these, the attack on the Expropriation Act by President Trump, and then also the unhappiness from Elon Musk about his Starlink fiasco for not being able to make it in South Africa because of the triple BEE, or what's called the quota-based, company type of arrangement, has now culminated.
No, wait, you're going to have to
into
explain
the-
that. To
Yeah.
an American audience may not know what that is. Explain what that is.
Yeah. So you have, by law, anybody who is investing in South Africa has to relinquish 30% of the company, the sort of shares of the company, to a local business. I mean, this happened in China, it happens in Malaysia, it happens in other places. But you got to, if you were Jamal coming to South Africa and you wanted to invest a large sum of something, you will have a local partner who will have 30% of it.
And Musk didn't want to do that.
And Musk didn't want to do that because he thought this was racially based. It gave money to Black people for free, and he didn't like that. And so they were they were tug of war with the government, and then so he decided not to bring his Starlink. But they're still in negotiation. They're trying to figure out what's the best way to get it right.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And so the US is in a
But
pissing match with South Africa over South African law.
yeah,
And South
but you
African
can
law
see that. Yeah,
is similar to
South
what the
African
US
law.
by the way.
Yeah,
With
it's the law.
yes,
So
with
it's like
slavery.
in the U.S. Yeah, in the with slavery in the U.S. If South Africa were to say today, if there were a form of slavery in the U.S. and South Africa were to say, wait a minute, we don't like your slavery thing. We're not going there. We're not going to invest there. It's an injection, and then sort of injecting yourself in these kind of local realities. It's not an easy thing, but the Trump administration, not that it doesn't seem to know it. You'll be surprised. I'm sure Trump is well briefed, especially in Florida and Mar-a-Lago. There are a lot of South Africans living there. But one of the things, in fact, two things that I think is motivating their strategy, as I told you, I was writing a confidential memo. Two things really important. I think the whole issue of South Africa having taken Israel on the ICJ genocide is just this is the biggest deal there. And there's a sort of revenge. It's that hand is not visible because it's working by proxy.
Oh, good point.
And largely it's a big thing. And the revenge is gonna come. Many of us will watch this and say, please watch that out. There will be a large scale, and the attack can come in different places. Right now they're quite soft, but I think they're refining their strategies. They didn't do it well on the white sort of minority racist support, and that refugee executive order didn't land well. The Afrikaners, the small group, just rejected it in large part. A few will probably take it up. But by proxy, Israel is fighting a war against South Africa using the United States. And this is very clear. But in a second one, another big scheme is that Trump also probably want to attack the BRICS countries, given the whole talk about the BRICS getting bigger and in having a economic power, but also strengthening more and more. Trump is probably looking at the weak link. And I can tell you, frankly, South Africa is a weak link. I shouldn't be saying this on like the
I want you to be honest. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm honest with it. South Africa is quite weak. There's so many vulnerability points that the leaders of the country are not paying attention to, that if they don't, there will be, anything can happen to them. And another one, most South Africans haven't paid attention to this. In fact, South Africa is about 1.2 and 2 million square kilometers on land. And at sea, South Africa's got 2.3 million square kilometers of assets, water assets, full of gold and minerals and everything else you want to talk, going all the way down to Antarctica. And so I was playing some scenarios with a good friend of mine, because we are futurists and so forth. And I said, now, President Trump has been talking about Greenland for a while. How about if it turns this around and said, I'm going to be taking South Africa's portion of Antarctica?
That'd be hard to do. Like the argument that Trump makes for Greenland is effectively, we're in a multipolar world. And because we're in a multipolar world, we need Fortress America. And we have other countries that have aligned against us, BRICS nations, for example. And so we need the Panama Canal, we need Canada, we need Greenland. We need these things.
But in fact, Jamal, Antarctica has got more than Greenland, and very little has been talked about. And South Africans, or at least South African leaders, haven't thought about it. There's no anticipatory approach to say, what if that happens? What do we do? Can Trump invade it? Can South Africa do anything? I mean, the moral hide is okay, but when we come to hard power, brutal power, if President Trump and the Americans want to take over the Antarctica part of South Africa, what is South Africa going to do?
Oh, Kofi, we're.
But you heard it here. You heard it here first on your show.
Well,
tell your audience.
The fact that you would broach that, it gets across the world that we're in now.
Yes.
5 years ago, this was never be a conversation. Nobody would ever say we don't want Trump invade South Africa.
Exactly.
The world that we're in today, with the U.S. continuously going with the refrain of, we're going to take Canada. Canada's going to be the 51st state. We're going to take Canada. Hey, we need to get our hands on Greenland. We're going to get Greenland. I don't care what they think. We're going to get Greenland. Yeah. That is a different world. Like, that is a weird space to be in when it's like, what if America decides to take something? Here's the thing. With the exception of Russia and China, we can take whatever we want.
Yes.
Like, in a hard military sense, we have the military to knock over any random government, Europe, Africa, otherwise. Now, would he do it? I don't buy the fact that he would do it or even broach it. I think he's broaching Canada and Panama and Greenland for specific reasons. That's what I mean when I'm saying I don't think he would broach, even go there. I mean, the American public would be like, okay, this is ridiculous. Why is Donald Trump trying to take South Africa? Like, in their minds, Africa is so far away. It's like, why is he doing that? It makes no sense.
Yeah,
I don't even think.
But you see, Jamal, he will attempt to make sense. He's got this very, very clever ways with his team to just make statement without explanation. Okay, we're taking over. Canada with Trudeau is the governor, and people believe that kind of thing. And so the next time he'll attack President Ramaphosa for being a corrupt leader, and people say, "Yeah, no, that's true. It's in Africa. He must be a corrupt leader," and that's going to happen. And then step by step, they're going to start rolling those balls of snow and making it bigger enough to give them room to say, "Hey, by the way, apparently Antarctica is a place where there's a lot more for us, and we can get it easily for free. Nobody's going to stop us."
Oh, I'm super skeptical, Kofi. I hope you're wrong.
I know, but remember, my job is to put what I call what ifs and then start to think about them. There's so many what ifs that could happen. I mean, that was the money from USAID, PEPFAR, that was just frozen. That was a what if. And suddenly people are in trouble. They're now thinking about different ways. But I must tell you, what is happening now with the pressure on South Africa by the United States is bringing people together. Of course, you have a small minority of white people who still they still think, in fact, they're more connected to the U.S. than their own country where they live, which is extraordinary to see that. Many of them have double nationalities or triple passport and so forth, and they can just split out in in a second without thinking about it. To say, well, leave those black people sort themselves out.
We'll see. We'll see. I am super skeptical. Look, like you said, your job is the question of what ifs, and Donald Trump is unpredictable, very
That's right.
unpredictable. Nobody would have
Mhm.
expected Trump to come in saying we want Canada, right? That was not something that was discussed during the election at all. So,
Yeah.
so pressure on South Africa, yes, I understand US aid, I understand this lever. I suspect you're right about the Israel angle, that this is revenge for them taking them to the International Criminal Court and getting an arrest warrant for Netanyahu and Gallant. I would imagine that is humiliating for Gallant and Netanyahu. Trump and Netanyahu are very close, so I'm not shocked that this angle is being open against South Africa. I guess the question is, what is the next shoe to drop in Donald Trump's attacks on South Africa in this sense? It's just, there's a racial motivation to this, I feel. Like, the reason, and again, it may be me adding Musk into it and the other people into it. I agree with you 1,000% with Israel. Yeah, fascinating. Kofi, man, you know this stuff. You are on the ball with it. One last thing, are there any other issues that we should be aware of taking place on the African continent right now as they bubble up?
Well, there are plenty of other stuff, but I think the Eastern Congo DRC crisis is very important. And the UN has been making all kinds of noises against the protagonists of this fight, with the movement of 23 groups of rebels there who captured Bukavu and Goma, and they're pillaging. But they seem to have some very serious point they're making about, they wanted some kind of sovereignty. The country is almost disabled, dysfunctional presidency. I mean, did you know that the president of the DRC is making $2 million a month?
Is he?
I
That is
mean,
a
think
very
about
poor
that.
country for that president to be making that much money.
In fact, it's not a poor country. It's a wealthy country, but badly run. There's
Yeah.
so much there. I mean, Congo, I took a plane from Kinshasa, from the western side of the Africa, the south there, all the way to Goma, where I was doing some training. It's an unbelievable sight to see, green everywhere. I mean, things grow everywhere. But in any case, I wanted to make sure that that crisis is serious. And I think there's a toss-up now between President Tshisekedi of the DRC and then President Paul Kagame. This is something to watch. People are now very angry at Paul Kagame. It's really strange. Things are turning against him now. Belgium is just sanctioning him. There's, I think, another country, but the European Union is finding ways to sanction him. And so we've never seen President Paul Kagame under such pressure. So there's something that's about to give. We need to watch out for that.
What do you think is about to give? Do you think they're about to find some kind of settlement in the conflict?
Not now, because I mean, the Congo, the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo itself, it's so badly managed that they don't even have the military necessary to defend that part of the country. It's a very important asset because that's where most of the minerals are. Yeah. And so if they can't defend it, how are they going to be able to run a country? Probably. People are worried that there may be a sort of secession between the eastern part and the rest of the DRC, but many of us don't want to see that happen as it happened to Sudan. Remember, that Sudan was split in half, the problem still remained. So it's about the quality of the leadership in Africa. Until that's sorted out, peace will be difficult to find.
Why is that so hard? I mean, like, look, and I'm not saying this from a position of being in a country where it's competent leadership. So that's where I'm coming from. You should see the polling here on the political parties in the media. It is like in the toilet. Right. So that's not where I'm coming from. And so maybe this question is stupid because I'm saying it from a position where I already accepted our own leadership is not that great. It's just, as you point out, it's a very wealthy country in resources, but that resource wealth is not translated into hard wealth in, let's say, like a European capital where they build these huge buildings and these beautiful streets and everything else. I guess my thing is, even as dysfunctional as the US is, we still are dysfunctional to a point where we still can function, if that makes sense. And I guess what I'm trying to get at is why, and maybe this is a stupid question, because I guess.
Well, no, it's not a stupid question. I mean, it's a great question. It's been the question. This is the question.
But I feel like a hypocrite asking it. That's what's a stupid question.
We know the answer by now. And the answer is simple. The forces that are keeping the business of dysfunctionality going are much more powerful than those who want peace and then redistributing the wealth and making sure people live in peace. This is as simple as I can summarize it. And out of those forces, there are Africans themselves, house niggers, who are playing to that crowd and then maintaining that kind of status quo. And there's also what we call the the beggar bull syndrome, where the same leaders who've been there for a long time have their masters outside, especially foreign forces, to whom they have to now pay some kind of tribute. And that's how they're living. It's a form of gangsterism. Yeah. And it's still so powerful that it overpowers people who are trying to do good. And I think that's the simple answer, but there's a lot more complication. But this is the best way I can summarize this for you.
No, you nailed it. And I think the same thing is true here too. I mean, it may not be beggar bowl in the sense of here, but corruption, oh man, yeah. Like it kills any sort of real political process. That
I try to couch the term corruption in beggar bowl because that's the same thing. You know, they're corrupt leaders who are just there and then do damage to Africa.
Kofi Kwaku, he is an African analyst, senior research fellow at the Center for Africa-China Studies in the University of Johannesburg. Kofi, man, you are always welcome here. Thank you for this. I really appreciate you joining.
Thanks for the invitation, Jamal, and looking forward to talking to you again. Cheers.
You have a good one. Be safe. Love talking to Kofi. Africa is often a blind spot for us in this country. So when you get the opportunity to have somebody on to discuss it, I take that opportunity. Kofi has my deepest appreciation for joining us. Before Mark comes on, there was a clip that blew my mind. Like, I am susceptible to this also. So if I say something and then a clip is played of me later saying, Jamal is being a hypocrite, here's the clip of Jamal being a hypocrite, here's what he said, here's what he's saying now. Fair enough. We're all human beings. We all talk on media. But Chris Matthews, this is a bit rich coming out of Chris Matthews. MSNBC had his favorite fallen son, Chris Matthews, because Chris Matthews had a show on MSNBC. He had a show forever. But what took Chris Matthews off air, if you remember, was when Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders were running. Matthews was hosting like a debate night. He brings Warren onto the debate night, and he says something to her that is interpreted as him being sexist. Matthews was off the air. I'm going to play this clip for you, and I'm going to remind you of something that Matthews said that I often bring up because of how mind-blowing it is that a Democrat will say it about another Democrat or a person running in the Democratic Party. Listen to what Matthews says here. I am enamored by these Democrats who walk around saying, we need a Democratic Joe Rogan. We need a Democratic Tea Party. We need a Democratic Elon Musk. Missing the basic fact that all of these people were Democrats. Joe Rogan voted for Bernie Sanders when Bernie Sanders ran as a Democrat. Elon Musk was a Democrat. All of these people were Democrats. Donald Trump was at Hillary Clinton's, I think Chelsea Clinton's wedding or something to that effect. All of these people were Democrats. You had a Tea Party on the Democratic side. It was called Justice Democrats. I'm glad Sabrina reminded me of that. So when Chris Matthews says this, I want to remind you of a very basic point that Chris Matthews clearly has forgotten that I will remember to my dying last breath because of its impact in regards to what it meant. It was a clarifying moment for me. I'll say it that way.
They're being flouted at the same time. Who is that person?
That's the question.
Well,
Because it's not
give
going
me
to
some
it's not going to be
ideas.
founded from the legislative, the branch of the Senate or the House of Representatives. They're not fixed to pick an outside spokesman. Schumer's
Right.
not an outside spokesman. Hakeem Jeffries turns out not to be an outside spokesman. So somebody has to come up. Chris Murphy's tried to do it, but he doesn't have the stature or the authority to do it. He's just another senator.
Buttigieg? He's got
Maybe.
the skills.
Maybe, but he's running for president. He is running for
Oh,
president.
but that maybe.
Well, I mean, I think that's a fact. I don't know why they haven't put together a group and said, you guys, you people, speak for the party. Get
What he is referring to is that Democrats are at the lowest polling they have ever had or recorded on CNN, meaning in the history of CNN polling, the recent results were so low. They were at like 29%, just astonishingly low numbers. NBC's polling was even lower than that. Put that in context. The lowest result that they have ever had. And Chris Matthews, and having this conversation like, okay, what can we do about this? How can they change this? What can we, put together in order to make the party look better than what the party is and to give speech for the party? The outsider that you had, Bernie Sanders. Now, I'm going back to 2016, Bernie Sanders. And my point is, Sanders was not a Democrat. He was an independent. He was running as a Democrat and being a mouthpiece for the Democratic Party when he ran, because he was running as a Democrat. He tried to give you something different than what you had. And the same Chris Matthews that is here now, looking for an outsider to speak for the Democratic Party. At the time when Sanders ran, I remember it exactly. He said, quote, maybe we need to lose to Trump because if Sanders wins it, he's going to take the party for a generation. So when 2016 Chris Matthews was looking at the outsider that he is screaming for now to speak for the political party, his response was, we need to put a knife in that guy. We can't let that guy win. Meaning they only want to win within certain boundaries. We want to win providing the candidate is like this. Okay, well, what happens when a candidate who's like this is not sufficient because the American public hates him, which is the reason you're at 29% right now? I'm only pointing out the level of hypocrisy, ludicrousness of Chris Matthews screaming for an independent figure to represent and speak for the Democratic Party because their polling is so low. And when they had the guy that was getting more kids, more blacks, more younger people to ungodly numbers, things that you would need to win, things that Kamala Harris needed to win that she didn't get, you put a knife in him. Fast forward, screaming for somebody to do what the guy was doing. I get it. Sanders is a flawed figure now on the left because many of us have this belief that we need to move beyond Sanders, that he's become somewhat of an impediment. And understand the reason we call him an impediment is because he ran twice. His result in running was the sheepdog, all of that energy, tens of millions of people into the Democratic Party when he did a half-ass run the second time around. And the first time around, I don't even think he thought he could win. You've had two chances. You've siphoned a huge amount of energy and goodwill from the base of the left, and you keep shoving it into a doghouse year after year after year. And the sad part and the sad truth is that he would do it again if he had the opportunity to run. That's the sad part. A lot of us are saying it has to be something else. There has to be something more. There has to be something beyond Sanders in regards to how the left organizes itself and how we move forward. I don't, for the life of me, know what that is. I've become so accustomed to the political system the way it is, just to be honest, that I can't see around it. I can think of what it may require. And I look at Trump and say, okay, some of these elements of Trump will be required in a candidate on the left also. And you must understand why I say that. As I told my mom, if the devil is doing something good, that is a fantastic thing to watch. If you're watching Vampire Diaries and you see a situation where Damon is doing something good, you're like, good. I like the fact that the devil is working in my interests. What I mean by that is you want and require somebody to not care, who hears the screaming at the political order in the way that the political order is organized, and to not care. That was not Sanders. It just wasn't him. He wasn't that guy. Sanders cared too much. And because he cared too much, he could be cowed and hobbled. And in the same way that he's willing to push all of his energy back into the Democratic Party, as opposed to saying, I will crash this boat if I need to crash this boat in order to get my political agenda accomplished. That is a tool of control and a tool by which he would have been hobbled in whatever task he was going to go with. He was too weak for the job. Now, if we are talking about a political revolution, we're talking about changing the existing political order. And if you're going to change any existing political order, you will get resistance. You will get screaming. Whether people can do something about it or not, you will get them yelling at the top of their lungs that you are doing something and you are destroying things. And your response has to be to not care or to deal with it in a political way where you still work towards that agenda. Trump gets in, I'm ending the war. You get screaming from one side of the political space. Trump doesn't care. And from the people who were in his political space were bent into shape. No, they don't agree with him. And no, they won't say anything about the fact that they disagree with him. You may get a random bird on Fox News complaining about something, but all things being equal, Trump has bent his party into shape and form because he is willing to use political power to go after anybody that is going to say anything against him. You may not like that. You may call the man a fascist. You may call him all sorts of names for doing so. But how else do you change a political order? It's that part. Meaning, you have an established system that the majority of the public doesn't like, say doesn't work, and doesn't accommodate their priorities. You require somebody who will change that established order and would accept the bitching and complaining from the people of that established order as that is bent into something else. I'm saying that you require Trumpian characteristics in a way that Sanders just didn't have, despite the fact that they always compared him to Trump. Whatever takes place on the left that is new in our political space will require some of those same characteristics in pursuit of other objectives. Sanders is not that guy. The point that I'm trying to make here, though, for Chris Matthews is that whether he is or not, he was given voice to a segment of the population where the energy was focused, meaning that was the fastest thing moving. And it was the fastest thing moving in the sense of the American public lumping onto it, the left lumping onto it, kids lumping onto it. All of those, and that energy is the same energy that they are lacking right now. It is almost like a transporter accident where the rough part of that person gets taken out. And the only thing you have is King Jeffries left over. I'm saying you need something else. I get Chris Matthews is screaming for something new. But when that's something new, he didn't like that something new. He didn't like that something new. And I would tell you something else. Democrats are complaining. But again, they want somebody in their spectrum that will be willing or that may catch fire. The problem that I think they're having is there is nobody in their spectrum. Because in the spectrum to which they want, these liberals, nobody in America wants. That's the 29%. It's not about a messenger. It's about the substance of the messenger. And I'm saying that is the thing to which you are lacking. That is the thing to which you need. And that is the thing to which you repudiated when in 2016, it ran and gave voice to the best elements, or at the very least, the best stated elements of the political party that you no longer have at your disposal. It is a bit rich that Chris Matthews is now pondering, overtly saying, putting it into the universe. We need a messenger. We need a messenger. And just to be clear as to why, this is CNN reporting just utter devastation in regards to the way the American public is seeing the Democrats.
Spare all I have to say, Democrats, call your office. You know, we're March Madness times. Terrible, terrible, terrible. To quote the great Charles Barkley, view Democratic Party favorably. CNN SRS. Look, Look at this, 29%. NBC News, you want to go lower than that? How about 27%? Both are record lows. The lowest going back to 1992 in CNN polling, the lowest going back on record to 1990 in NBC News polling. The majority of Americans hold an unfavorable or negative view of the Democratic Party at this point. All I can say is I'm a big fan of the oldies, so I'm going to quote Chubby Checker. How low can you go?
Nice. Well,
How low can you go? How low can you go? The lowest in polling history for NBC and the lowest in polling history for CNN. That is where they are. That is where they are. And the best that you can get out of them is we need a better messenger. We need a better messenger. I just astonishing. It's not the message. It's not the messenger. It is the substance that is missing. And they don't see it. Look, I would tell you this. I had a conversation with a liberal. She was a doctor. And her and I used to fight like cats and dogs. She was a Democrat. She was a traditional Democrat. You would know what is going to come out of her mouth, depending upon what comes out of Rachel Maddow's mouth. I love her to death. She is gorgeous. She's in a bubble. And I remember having a conversation with her about Sanders, and her thing was like, oh, no, that's okay. I don't want him. I was like, okay, well, you lose. Like, look, man, this is not magic. It's not, you know, if I need something to walk, it needs legs in some fashion, some capacity. You're not going to have a ball walk because it doesn't have legs. There are mechanics that are required for things to work. It's not magic. Political parties are not magical devices. They also require things in order to work. It's like a human being. If I'm going to live, I need clean air. I need clean water. I need food. I need, sunlight. There are things that I require to actually function in the world in order to exist, to just be alive. I require things. I'm saying everything is that way. A cup is shaped a certain way so it can take water in so you can drink it. A car is built a certain way. It has wheels. It rolls in order you can drive it. I'm saying political parties are the same. They're not magical devices. They are structured legal fictions that are required certain things in order to function. Beyond the legalities, substance is required. And I know they think that's not true because they've become so accustomed to the people swashing back and forth. And it may happen, but those people still will remain unhappy. I'm saying that it is the substance that is missing. The substance is the thing that they're getting wrong. They think that this is purely messaging, that they are so great, moral, ethical, that their values are so, emancipatory, that the issue is not anything to do with them. And I'm saying the issue has everything to do with them. Their values are not emancipatory. They've supported genocide for the last year and a half or 2 years. They've backed a war. They're still screaming like howler monkeys about maintaining a war that has been going on for the last 3 years that the U.S. pushed us into, and they can't necessarily be honest about it. On the domestic front, what have they done for you lately? Yeah, you get the New Deal, and yeah, you get Social Security, but that was 60 years ago. From the standpoint of workers, they voted for a billionaire. I'm saying that the issue is substance. A billionaire never wins a contest on the working class if indeed that party was doing something that the working class can say, hey, this party is doing X and Y. People don't see it. They don't see it. Now, you can argue, well, it's because Republicans lie. Okay, well, every political party lies. It can't be that. You still would win in that context because every political party effectively does it. You have lost to a man that you call Hitler, that you call a fascist, that you call all of these things. Try to shoot him, try to put him in a cage. Censorship as a weapon, lawfare as a weapon. These are things that the Democratic Party was effectively using. They've gone awry. They've gone awry. I'm just fascinated by Chris Matthews opining. Oh, we need a messenger. We need somebody to give the Democratic liberal message. And if they can give the message with passion and verve, then we can get people on our side. No. And I'm really out seeing something else, by the way. Obama was a supernatural political figure. And what I mean by that is he had better political instincts than, let's say, a Joe Biden, a Hillary Clinton, but he's not that different of a creature than either of those. It is purely because of his political instincts that he was able to effectively win twice. And even that is not keeping his political gravitas from ebbing, as you can see in the way that people view him, especially in the Black community. I'm saying that there's something fundamentally wrong with the party itself. It's not the individual actors, it is the party itself. And until they get to that, they're not getting anything. And Chris Matthews can be on MSNBC and opine all he wants about requiring a messenger, an American whisperer. It's the message, dude. That's the problem. It's missing substance. That's the problem. Chris Matthews is not going to see this video. I wish he did see this video. He's missing the boat. He's missing the point. All of them are missing the point. Everybody who's sitting on this network right now, having this conversation, is fundamentally and fully missing the point. They're missing the point. I'll play it one more time.
Out there and do that. I mean, I agree with you on Schumer. The Schumer question is a small part of this.
Yeah.
But, you know, if you talk to people on the very progressive side of the Senate, they'll tell you it's a close call.
It's a close call.
And by the way, if we're sitting here 2 months after the government shut down and it's all being
Bickering
blamed
about
on
that.
Democrats,
Yeah.
the numbers will even be lower than
No,
we just saw.
That's why I agree. There should be an exciting a construct in which they push back on facts. On facts. Just stick to the facts. I don't.
Yeah, they're missing the boat. They're missing the boat. It's not about the facts. It's not about the facts. Because I don't think they went on the facts either. Domestically, maybe. And that's where Trump will go too far. And my fear, my deep, overwhelming fear, is that he goes too far. I don't want them to be able to point and say, hey, Social Security looks like it's collapsing because of what Donald Trump and Elon Musk is doing. And the public says, oh my God, Social Security is collapsing because of what Trump and Elon Musk is doing. So now we must vote Democrat in order to protect Social Security. I don't want that. I don't want them to be able to get the vote because people are sloshing back to Democrats. I don't want that. I don't want them to exist as a political entity if they're not going to represent Americans' interests. And yeah, I focus on Democrats because ultimately Republicans don't believe in this stuff. They don't use as their identifying marker that we are fighting for the working class. We're the everyman. Okay, well, they don't do that. Well, maybe they do it now, but that wasn't their ethos. That wasn't the thing to which they focused on. That wasn't who they were. And so in the political space, you get Democrats saying, we believe in these things. And it's like, okay, well, if you believe in those things, then you could be hit by the fact you're not doing those things. So yeah, I focus my ire on them because from my point of view, if anything is going to get accomplished in a political sense, where we move from point A to point B on issues of healthcare, education, Social Security, increase of minimum wage, etc., these lefty economic priorities, it's only going to come through one vehicle. That vehicle is missing tires. The hood is up. The engine is on fire. It is a pointless endeavor right now. Seeing a bunch of rich people on air talk about a political party that is supposed to represent the working class, and they seem to think everything is great. And I imagine everything is great for Chris Matthews. I'd imagine everybody on there is very well paid, very comfortable, and talk about how great the party is, that the public just doesn't see it. And they just require a messenger to say, hey, I know this car is on fire. I know the hood is up. I know the paint is tarnished. I know it's missing wheels, but it's a fantastic vehicle. You just are going to love it once you get to know it. Dude, no. Just no. Absolutely. Entirely. 1000%. No. Just no. I want to go to the chat for a bit because Mark is going to be coming on probably in a minute or two. Let's see. Chasey Heretics shows. I probably should have read this in advance. I wouldn't hold Dick Cheney's battery charge hostage, and we have to honor Roman law while it still exists around the globe, and there won't be an impediment for military tribunals. We don't have tribunals. There is no Leviathan, as Mark pointed out. By Leviathan, I mean there's nothing above political space in regards to countries. We fight it out at the barrel of a gun. I want to bring on my guest, my man, Mark Sloboda. He's an international relations and security analyst, a good friend of the show, and a man I greatly listen to because you're often right, Mark. How you doing? You doing okay this morning? Well, evening for you. How you doing? You doing all right?
Afternoon. Tomorrow, I'm alive. How are you? Thanks for having me on. It's always an honor and a pleasure.
Oh, man, it's always an honor and pleasure to have you. So, a conversation is going to take place with principals today. Putin and Trump are supposed to talk. The reporting is that the talks are going to be about territorial concessions that Ukraine is effectively going to have to make. This is according to the New York Times and some of the other reporting that Trump said it himself. We are going to talk about the territories that they have in Ukraine. He says something to the effect of they've shifted and not what they were. And so we need to have a conversation about it. I think to myself, good. The principals are talking. That means the conversation with Witkoff had to go well. Witkoff did say it went positively. I strongly suspect, and correct me if I'm wrong, that whatever that conversation was with Witkoff, it was positive enough where the principals can now get engaged and have a further conversation over, all right, how do we dismember Ukraine? And how do we sell this to the Europeans and to Ukraine to get them to drink at the trough? What is your take on this? How do you view this? Because you may have a different take on this.
Yeah, I think far too much is being made of this, right? There is not a diplomatic settlement going to be reached by a conversation between a real estate developer who came on Trump's behalf to Moscow and then a phone call between Trump and Putin. They're not going to divvy up the world. You know, it's not Yalta carving up. No. Negotiations have not even begun, right? The teams on both sides have not even met. People are reacting in the 24-hour news cycle, social media driven world. And this is not that, right? Trump seems to my mind to think that, if I could just meet with Putin and we can hash it out, right, over a beer, that seems to be his attitude. But that's not the Russian side at all. And he's talking, we're never close to settling this and blah, blah, blah. On the Russian side is like, well, actually, we haven't even started talking yet. I mean, our embassies still aren't even functioning.
To get you to respond to it, because I'm super... Yeah. Okay, I'm going to play Trump's comment, and I want you to get your response to this comment, because you're right. Like, Trump seems to think that a conversation is what they need in order to effectively either come up with the contours of a deal or come up with a deal. This is him. I think this was yesterday.
Concessions will you be seeking to have Putin make to get concessions will you be seeking to have Putin make to get a deal done?
Well, I think we'll, be talking about land. It's a lot of land. It's a lot different than it was before the wars, And we'll be talking about land. We'll be talking about power plants. That's up, it's a big question. But I think we have a lot of it already discussed very much by both sides.
You'll ask him.
Ukraine.
All right. So what do you think they're going to be talking about?
Yeah. I think that may be very well what Trump thinks is going to happen, right? I think Trump thinks that he's going to have a phone call. He seems to think that if he could just meet with Putin, right? If they could just sit this down, they could hash this whole thing out in 3 hours, right? I mean, that seems to be his position. And Russia has agreed to a second phone call between the two leaders at seemingly the almost desperate insistence of the American side. Now they're pushing this ceasefire nonsense. We have to save the beautiful people. Those people in Gaza and Yemen, those are ugly people. F them, right? We'll drop bombs on them, right? The Israelis will drop bombs on them, right? Russia is supposed to sign a ceasefire with a country that just greenlit Israeli breaking of a ceasefire and dropping, after rearming them with 2,000-pound bombs, and drops on them without anyone batting or blinking an eye. And we're supposed to sign a ceasefire, brokered, with these people. No, I don't think so. This is absurd. First of all, as of I noticed the word ceasefire suddenly started dropping out of Trump's social media posts. He's still saying he needs to stop the war right now, blah blah blah. You know, he begged and pleaded at the end of the last week that Putin would allow thousands of encircled Ukrainian troops, you know, to get out, and Putin respond, you know, in the Kursk region, and which Zelensky, by the way, denies that is happening at all. He's still living in propaganda land. And Putin was like, yes, if they surrender, then they'll be treated according as prisoners of war, according to the Geneva Convention, despite the atrocities, the executions, the rapes, the torture of Russian civilians in the Kursk region that the Russian government is amassing, volumes and stacks of information on. We have very little sympathy for them. But because you're so concerned on humanitarian grounds, if they surrender, if they receive an order from Zelensky ordering them to surrender and they put down their arms, then they'll be treated. Otherwise, they'll be treated as terrorists and we'll eradicate them with, fervor. And he even extended the deadline, and that expired yesterday at 6 o'clock in the morning local time. So more than 24, 36, even 40, a significant amount of time ago, right? So, that's already gone. Obviously, Zelensky refused to even agree that there was any troops surrounded or the reality on the ground in Kursk. And so
they said they're continuing operations in the Kursk region. That's according to,
Yeah, they're still in one village in the Kursk region. They're still there in one tiny little hamlet on the border. Right, they're under fire. They're continuing there. They've lost everything else at this point. But as of speaking, I think they have one, and they have a small presence in two others. But this is like the very last settlements right on the border,
right.
And they're trying to keep a tiptoe in the Kursk region. By the way, all this talk of peace and ceasefires and everything, the Kiev regime just launched significant attacks in Belgorod again, obviously trying to create another incursion. The Kursk incursion failed, so they go back to the east again in the Belgorod region, and they tried to punch through the border into Belgorod from the Kharkov region.
Well, they're desperate. They're going to lose
three times. And with significant forces, and they were repulsed, but they did manage to pretty much demine the Russian defensive minefields in the area. So there's every reason to believe that they'll be back again, right? That it could be happening right now, right? Or tonight or something of the sort. So they're not giving up, right? This isn't, they're focused on a rather interesting law.
That's not really shocking, though. Real quick, they are trying to hold on to whatever land they can in order to negotiate, and if they can have a breakthrough that allows a bargaining chip, that I would imagine Russia doesn't want to give. Meaning they're desperate. They're doing everything that they can. They either hold on to land in Kursk.
The Russian government has been clear. There'll be no negotiations while you hold on to any Russian land. There'll be no trades. Again, they're living in some delusional fantasy land. But this mention of the power plant by Trump was very interesting, which means to me that the Ukrainian side is pushing this really hard, right? They want the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant back, right? For one, it's the largest nuclear power plant in Europe, right? It has a lot of electrical capacity, which is important, but also it's a nuclear power plant, right? Russia's not going to hand a nuclear power plant. First of all, as far as the Russian people, the Russian constitution is concerned, Zaporozhye is now part of Russia, right? So they're not going to take a step back no matter what. On top of that, they're supposed to hand a nuclear power plant back to the side that has been bombing with drones and artillery, not only this nuclear power plant, but other nuclear power plants for the last 3 years. No, I don't think so. they don't even have the responsibility to have any nuclear power plant. They do still have 3 small ones in West Ukraine, which is still problematic, but they're certainly not going to give them this back. But he seems really obsessed with this. So a law was passed yesterday in the Ukrainian, the Kiev regime's parliament, the Rada, so that it makes it possible that even during martial law, right, which is supposed to be like a defensive emergency state in the country,
Right.
technically, Ukrainian troops are not allowed to be stationed or sent outside the country, right? Obviously, that was completely just ignored for the Kursk incursion and the various Belgorod incursions, right? So on and so forth. But they specifically created an exception for that now, right? And what a lot of people are thinking is that and I mean, this has been a possibility for a long time, but whatever the Russian and Ukrainian both military analysts are chattering about is that Zelensky, if things start coming out of negotiations between the U.S. and Russia, or even if all the problems in the world are solved by a phone call later today, and we all sing Kumbaya, that they will attack Transnistria. In Moldova, the separatist region of, well, again, we've talked about this possibility for a long time there. Russia has no ability to protect Transnistria there, right? They have no ability to get extra troops there to protect them in any way. There's a small peacekeeping force there, and the locals, but any serious military force. Again, Zelensky he just lost what he considered to be his card to trade for Russia. So he's basically threatening that to achieve another card by attacking Transnistria.
Why haven't they attacked it yet, if that's the case?
Well,
I mean, because they've been losing.
Okay, so there's all kinds of implications. First of all, it would draw Moldova directly into the conflict, right? It would internationalize it in a significant way. Second of all, I mean, as far as Russia is concerned, I mean, this is local people supported by Russian peacekeepers, right, in a breakaway region. It is hardly strategically important to this conflict, right? It would be an escalation, right? And there is supposedly significant Soviet munitions stored there. But I have to believe the Russian side has that wired to blow. There's been a lot of talk throughout this war of going into Moldova. But, I would presume that they have been talked away from this multiple times by the West, who didn't want that kind of horizontal escalation to draw in other countries, right? This has already happened enough other times. I mean, attacks, supported by them in Syria and Africa, all of this, but they've been relatively small scale. This would, of course, be a major incursion, right? And it would be done under the rubric of returning the separatist region of Transnistria to the pro-Western government of Moldova. I mean, that was the idea. Right now, it's just a threat, but it's always a possibility because they're desperate. Yeah. Even if it makes no sense to you or me, just like the Kursk incursion, it doesn't mean that they won't do it, right? Particularly if they feel, and after the Kursk incursion, after the terrible losses they suffered in this chaotic rout, right? I mean, it was not a withdrawal. It was a rout with their forces fleeing, leaving a whole lot of Western equipment for Russia as trophies, a lot of munitions, and a lot of these forces were killed, right? They were trying to escape, sometimes in convoys, in which case they were just gunned down, right? If they tried to escape in any vehicles, there's talk. I mean, this has been written about in the BBC, in the New York Times, interviewing a handful of Ukrainian soldiers that did escape from Kursk, right? And they're talking about, that it was a living, a hell, right? That they were chased by swarms of drones, right? That they couldn't escape in vehicles because every vehicle would be targeted by 2 or 3 or 4 drones, as well as the artillery and the helicopter gunships and everything else. So their best chances to escape through forests and fields and small groups at night. And even then, they're being hunted down, by drones, with infrared cameras and by troops and everything. So that was a terrible rout. They suffered terrible losses in equipment, in munitions and ammunition, and of course in manpower. Right? Supposedly, what was some of their best units left?
67,000 people.
Yeah,
67,000 is an astonishing number.
Yeah. So they're in a desperate panic situation. So, I mean, expect them to try to break out of the box, right? And we've heard, right? So Russia, this whole idea of the U.S. is demanding a ceasefire, right? The conflict must cease now. Why? Why would Russia agree to that? Why?
Right.
I mean, first of all, the Europeans are loudly talking, right? Like screaming hysterically that as soon as there is a break in the conflict, that they're going to sneak British and French troops and their other unnamed 37 countries of the coalition of the willing part 2 or whatever they want to call it, that does not include the U.S., that they intend to put them on the ground in Ukraine, right? So basically saying that if you agree to a ceasefire, NATO is going to occupy Ukraine, right? So, I mean, why would Russia agree to that then?
So I saw that.
Why would they give them a breather after their military is crumbling, especially right after Kursk, to give them time to rearm and Putin point that out? I mean, Putin very politely declined.
Yes.
But he played the good cop. The Russian foreign minister, Lavrov, and his Putin's chief foreign policy advisor, Ushakov, they had much more direct words about Russia's attitude towards the ceasefire, which is not only no, but niet, but hell niet, right?
Yeah.
Not a chance in hell. But what they're trying to do, and particularly part of the reason Putin, did the Socratic method of dismissing this ceasefire by asking a lot of questions, pointing out how impossible and ridiculous it would be. Anyway, who's going to monitor it? Who's going to enforce it, right? What is Ukraine going to be doing in the meantime, right? Are they going to be rearming? Are they going to be receiving Western weapons? Why would we ever agree to that, right? So he did that. But part of the reason is they hope to draw the U.S. into real negotiations that, it must be said, have not even started yet, right?
Fair enough.
Lavrov and Rubio had that initial meeting, right, where they made some initial first steps to even restore basic diplomatic relations. And as of the end of last week, there is still not even normal embassy function, right? Much less anything else. Now, supposedly, the U.S. has decided on who their head negotiator will be, and supposedly has been working on a negotiating team, but they haven't even named them yet. Russia seems to think they know who it is, but they haven't said. So, and Russia hasn't declared who their team is, right? I mean, Trump seems to think this is going to be settled by his real estate developer friend, being sent to Moscow, and having a conversation at I don't know, what was it, 2:00 in the morning or something like that, last minute. That's not going to cut it, right, from the Russian side, right? I mean, they want negotiations, painstaking, painful negotiations, right, that set out the future of Ukraine, and everything. The idea that you have to have, they're saying, the Americans, Witikoff said, we have to have a ceasefire before negotiations begin. No, you don't, actually. That didn't happen that way for the U.S. in the Korean War. It didn't happen that way in the Vietnam War. It didn't happen when Trump was negotiating with the Taliban for how to pull, for how the U.S. would retreat from Afghanistan, right? Yeah. There weren't any ceasefires, right? That is certainly not necessary, and Russia's not going to agree to it because it's not in Russia's interest to. And it must be said, In
Okay.
my opinion, and I know this is an opinion shared by a lot of Russians, not just normal Russians, but a lot of people in the Kremlin and in probably the entirety of the Russian military brass, that a peace at this point is not in Russia's interests, right? Why should they, have the Americans who have lost this conflict say, well, you can keep that piece of land that you've taken, but you can't take that piece of land. And Trump is going to say that Ukraine can't join NATO, but that's all you're going to get, right? It's going to be Trump's pinky swears, right? Like that's going to cut
Oh
it.
man, I'm so more optimistic on this than you are, and let me explain why.
Yeah.
I think I take the position that Trump doesn't care about Ukraine. I don't think he cares one iota. I don't even think Trump would know where it is if you put a map in front of him and told him to find it. I think he wants.
I do not argue with that. I do not argue.
I think he just wants it to be over with.
Yeah.
And in any conversation with Putin, I think what they're talking about are the grand contours of, okay, how do we end it? And Putin will say, I need this, this, and this. And Trump would say, I need something to sell to Europe and to Ukraine to get that horse to water, to make it drink. I don't care about this. I just want it over with. Which means the ceasefire thing is purely a tool to, as you point out, to get them into negotiations, considering Ukraine was saying, I am not going to negotiate under no terms. I'm not going to give up territory. I'm not going to do any of this stuff. Zelensky's still running around saying the same thing.
That. He's
still
saying that. He's saying that this weekend. And Russia's we're supposed to give you a ceasefire when the other side, you haven't even leashed your proxy properly yet, right? Because as soon as he came out of as soon as the meeting in Jeddah was down, right, and they had agreed to a ceasefire, they came right out of that meeting and made statements completely objecting to everything that Russia said is absolutely necessary for them for a ceasefire.
And everything that America said that they already agreed with.
Yes.
America's already said territorial concessions are part of it. They've already said
the Europeans, right? Let's make this clear. The purpose, the first logic, right? There's layers of logic here with the Europeans, right? The Europeans are in full warmonger mode, right? They're Keir Starmer and Macron, and I assume that Merz will join them as soon as he is officiated as the new Chancellor of Germany. They want to put troops on the ground in Ukraine, right? They believe ultimately. First of all, they believe that if they make the threat to put troops down in Ukraine, that Russia will never agree to a ceasefire, right?
Yes, which is the point I was getting at.
That's part of the logic. Right. And they're right. Russia, as long as they're talking about that, and Trump has not made a statement saying, no, you won't, right, and ordering them or something like that, right? Russia's never going to agree to a ceasefire. So their first thing is to blow up any type of top of a ceasefire, or if they're intending that, even at the end of a peace process, that's an automatic red line, right? In losing the war in Ukraine, you don't get to claim victory with NATO troops on the ground, right? That's not the way that this is going to happen, right? And okay, so their logic is, I think they're essentially. Have you ever seen a pack of hyenas goading each other on to take on a lion? Right? How they'll dart forward and yap and snarl. And I say this. Hyenas, forgive me, because I have far more. Hyenas are fascinating, incredible creatures at a moral level so far above the Europeans that, as far as I'm concerned, that I'm pained to make the comparison between.
You're disrespecting hyenas.
I'm disrespecting hyenas here. Forgive me, hyenas. But that's what it's like. It's like the hyenas actually had a lion on their side. But he's like, I'm not feeling it today, right? I mean, he's wandering off. Now they're trying to goad each other on, right? I believe that they are trying to push, certainly Macron and Starmer, even if Russia does not agree to a ceasefire, right? Even if there is no pause in the fighting, they're working up to sending European troops, British, French, and whoever else, Baltics, I don't know, into Ukraine, right? Not on the contact line, right? They know that, right? They want to hide some troops in Lvov. They specifically mentioned Odessa, possibly Kiev. They're calling it a reassurance force, although they also said a robust reassurance force. And I'm like, that word robust, you don't even have a robust forces in your capability, in your arsenal left, right? You keep using that word robust. I don't think it means what you think it means, right? But they want them there as a human tripwire force, right? Thinking that Russia won't dare attack them, right? Because they're still NATO troops, whatever hat they're wearing. And then if Russia attacks them, then no matter what Trump says now, he will be forced to come in, and then we got World War III, right? And they're absolutely ready for that. That's their chain of logic. First of all, ruin ceasefire and negotiations. Second of all, get troops on the ground, which is the equivalent of a dog, urinating on something to claim it as its territory, right? You won't dare, try to claim this back for me if I drop my, urine on this territory, right? Whatever they have, left in Ukraine, and they're of course severely mistaken, because that is not the mood. I mean, Putin just showed up to the front in Kursk for the first time in this conflict in camouflage, right? That was a message, right, to the Russian people, to the West, right, to the Kiev regime, that, whatever, phone call fantasies, that Trump is playing right now, that Russia is laser focused still on the conflict, because
to be fair,
serious peace negotiations haven't even begun.
Well, to be fair, Trump has sidelined Europe in these conversations on the war,
and they're going to inject themselves back in, and if they put troops on the ground, that's it. I mean, there's zero chance of any negotiations further, right? I mean, that's it. That's done. That's war then. And Medvedev. Wow, the language. I mean, I like to call the new Medvedev, right? Like, there was the Medvedev in the 90s who was dancing around to the song American Boy.
Oh, he's a hard ass now.
Right? I mean, he wasn't even a closet neoliberal. He was a neoliberal in the 90s. He was a pro-Western neoliberal. Now he's Zhirinovsky 2.0. He's the most fire-breathing, whatever. I don't know whether it's genuine, whether, this is the rebranding, or whether he really had some type of Damascene conversion along the way. I can't say. But anyway, so first of all, he replied to Starmer's threats over the weekend, right? In two different posts on social media. And the first one, he said that Starmer can shove those ideas, the ideas about troops on the ground, back up your shithole, like shithole, right? I'm sorry, for the YouTube censors out there. But he did qualify that with comma, diplomatically speaking.
Fair enough. I don't know if there's a difference, but fair enough.
Right. So, and then the second post, I mean, that came out over the weekend, he said, frank out, if any NATO members put troops on the ground in Ukraine, right, under flag, under uniform, we all know they're there in small numbers anyway, but that will be war. And he said that right out. It will be war, right? Because it needs to be said like that, right? I think Putin actually needs to say it to bring it home still, because, he
is far too diplomatic. Even in look, I think his response to Trump was masterful. I agree with you that this is his way of saying, okay,
good cop, bad cop.
Yes, absolutely. Because if you remember, in response to Kursk, Medvedev says something like they would be mercilessly and methodically hunted down and slaughtered, or something like destroyed. I think he used the term.
And that's exactly what's happening as we speak.
Yep. I think he is Putin's it. I think that's what he's really thinking.
Are you familiar with Key and Peele, the comedic duo in the Comedy right? Remember this?
I made the exact same analogy.
Anger management translator, right? Exactly like that. Medvedev is Putin's anger management translator. Yes.
Yep. I made the same analogy to Garland. I was like that. It's Medvedev tells you exactly what he's thinking. It's just brutal.
I actually told that to Garland too. So we've been.
I mean, I'm fascinated by that. I mean, because look, Putin is very diplomatic, and I guess my thing is in a conversation with Donald Trump. Let me ask you this: what does Putin offer anything to end the war, or is it just look, we won? This is what we need to end it. Full stop.
I can't. All right. So if you go back to 2021, right? What Russia was demanding from security guarantees. I mean,
Right.
I say demanding, but they were basically begging the West, please sit down and let's work this out so we don't have to do this, right? You know, before the Russian
And they have to
intervention
know
began and
that
Biden
Russia
blew them
doesn't get
off, right?
security guarantees.
But
Russia
they
doesn't
were
get that.
also demanding that NATO withdraw forces from Eastern Europe, right? From the Baltics, from these other countries, that it, you know, from basically anything further east than Germany, right? The
Yeah.
U.S. military bases in Poland and Romania, right? These air defense missiles, which are also, you know, being Aegis Ashore systems, are also, of course, capable of firing nuclear tipped tomahawks and the like, right? Which was, you know, part of the real reason there. So those were all, you know, things that Russia was demanding at the time. I think that is Russia's idea of a concession at this point. All right, we'll drop the demand for that, right? I mean, that's they're not making out. According to the New York Times, they made in fact, they actually used a picture of Yalta to talk about
I saw
this.
that.
Buying into the Trump and Putin are dividing up the world, you know, in a phone call meme that's going around, which I for one do not believe. But hey, I mean, we'll all find out. But they specifically mentioned Odessa, and so I mean, most Russians believe that Odessa should end up in Russian hands at the end of this conflict. It's a Russian city. There's majority Russian-speaking, Russian-leaning people in Odessa. It was founded by Catherine the Great, and you know, it need to cut the Kiev regime off from the Black Sea, right? Of course, the West thinks exactly the opposite. They desperately want to maintain a Ukrainian port. The British keep talking about putting naval bases there so that they can have naval bases on the Black Sea, which of course is just, you know, waving a red flag in front of the Russian bull in this regard. But the New York Times, for some reason, mentioned that Odessa was being discussed. And I've heard other reports talking about that, which I regard to be complete nonsense, that Russia is considering trading the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant in return for control of port infrastructure in Odessa, which just seems absolutely ludicrous and impossible and completely non-workable to me. But anyway, the problem with Odessa, of course, is the geography, because an amphibious assault to take Odessa is just not within Russian capabilities, not without taking World War II level casualties, which Russia has, you know, and even then with no guarantee of success. And even if they were to do it with contested river crossings, they'd first have to take Kherson City and then Nikolaev and only then Odessa, right? It's very hard, right? It's very hard. And even in World War II, when the Soviet Union took Odessa back from the then Nazi Germany instead of Nazi Kiev, they had to go up through Kiev and down to the south then first, right? So the geography of Odessa is very hard. So however much important a strategic objective it might be for Russia, it's going to be hard. And the absolute best chance, you know, is probably as part of some final settlement, but not that is not going to be achieved right now with Russian forces still fighting in Donbass, still fighting, still fighting in Donbass and Kherson City and Zaporozhye, right? I mean, Russia's going to have to be moving on the Dnieper and moving on Kiev which is a possibility because Russian forces have driven the Kiev regime forces out of Kursk region. Right. Again, there's like 1 or 2 hamlets that they're still fighting over right now right on the border. But Russian forces are also already in Sumy region on the other side in Ukraine, right? And if Russia has very significant forces now in the Kursk region, right? They built up very significant forces. And to be frank, they built up enough forces that even if their special forces operation with this pipeline assault didn't work, I mean, it had phenomenal success. I don't think that they expected it to have as much success as it did, where the Ukrainian forces just broke and ran, and then Russia just picked them off as they were leaving, right, to huge losses. They had enough forces built up there to take it if that didn't work in a concentrated assault. So now they can move into Sumy region, possibly even taking Suma City. And if they take Sumy City, then highway straight to Kiev, right? And that's where Russia, in the beginning of the conflict, how they came in. They came in through the Kursk region, through Sumy, and then to Kiev in the very beginning of the conflict, right? Yeah. Later they withdrew as part of this nonsense Istanbul communique that they were hoodwinked on once again, but they can repeat that process. And that is the most likely scenario for Russia getting Odessa back. A move in force on Kiev that forces an unconditional surrender, right? And then demanding Odessa as part of a settlement, right? As part of an unconditional surrender. But we're a long way from that. We're a long way from that, right? And the Europeans, again, they think they're going to put troops on the ground in Odessa. They're going to do anything they can to save it. And they're talking now that they'll swing in immediately after a ceasefire agreement, right? Practically guaranteeing that there will be no ceasefire agreement. But I believe that they're working themselves up to doing it, even if Russia doesn't agree.
I think they're trying. I mean, I think the catch becomes whether or not the U.S. allows it.
I don't know. I think the Europeans at this point are that they will just do. They are working themselves up to doing it, right? They keep saying we need a U.S. backstop, and the Trump people keep saying no. But I think they're working themselves up to doing it, even if Trump, refuses.
We'll see.
They're that panicked and desperate, and panicked and desperate people do stupid things, right? Yeah. Stupid things, right? So they're just in a mental propaganda space, ideological space, where they can just not like the Kiev regime, like Zelensky, whose own people says he's delusional, and you can't talk reality to him, right? His own people talking to Time magazine again. I think the European leaders are by and large, Fitzo and Orban accepted from that, of course, are in the same type of mental space, right? Where Blinken and Sullivan in the auto pen would be there if they were still in office in the U.S. as well, right?
I accept that. If Trump wants a deal, he's going to have to tell them no. And if they have the stones to blow off the U.S.'s no and decide to put troops in, okay, those people are going to die. I don't see.
Trump actually already suggested that Europeans, that was actually in a policy brief by Hegseth, that the U.S. expected the Europeans to put troops on the ground as part of any settlement.
Would Russia accept let's say China, India, etc., as a peacekeeping force?
I think these are fantasy suggestions. Why on earth would China or India want to send? First of all, even the creation and the mandate, that would take months and months and months for something like that to be worked out. I can't see the West accepting that much. Russia couldn't really politically object to it, but I think the Chinese and the Indians and the Russians
wouldn't do it. They'd be like, why are we doing this?
The only troops that are going to be allowed on the ground in Ukraine are Russian troops. That's it. The only security guarantee that will mean anything that a future government in Ukraine, right, if a Ukraine exists at the end of this, will ever get is a security guarantee by coming to an accommodation with Russia. That's it. That's all they're ever going to get, right? I mean, Starmer can make all the promises of a 100-year security guarantee from the UK he wants. He himself has said we need a security guarantee from the US in order to properly give our security guarantee to Ukraine, right? I mean, it shows what a fantasy all of this scenario is. It all comes down at the end is, do you want World War III?
It's going to be that, right? Which Europe is trying to start.
I believe that Ukraine is important enough to Russia and Russians and the people of East Ukraine, right, that they will go to that brink and step over it on the issue of Ukraine.
Do you expect
the West want to do that?
Political implosion in Ukraine? Like meaning after Kursk, for example, that is going to shock the conscience. This is a Zelensky UK project that failed radically, that got nearly 100,000 people killed with all sorts of equipment and everything else burning in Kursk as we speak. Does this create a political, I don't know, nightmare?
There is no politics in Ukraine. There is no politics. There is a dictatorship, right? There really is.
See, the reporting, no, I agree with you. But the reporting is saying that Trump is trying to find his man for Ukraine.
He was until Zelensky rolled over last week, right? And now that talk.
He didn't roll over. He's gone rogue. Zelensky's been out.
I mean,
repudiating everything Trump has been saying.
Yeah, unfortunately, how do you do that? How do you do that, right? Zelensky refuses any elections, right? I mean, he's already gone to the brink. You know, the U.S. already tried the withdrawing, at least rhetorically, withdrawing military and intelligence support. Whether it was real or not is another question. And the suggestion being put out that Zelensky should resign. And the Europeans all stepped up. No, we love you. We'll protect you. Did Daddy say mean things to you? And that was gone, right? The pressure was alleviated. Right. And eventually it was, yes. Okay. So they agreed to say, oh, they'll mouth the words. Yes, we want a ceasefire. Right. But knowing full well that the Europeans were doing everything possible, with their threats to make sure that no ceasefire was ever agreed to. But Zelensky he's gone after any political opponents he could potentially have. I mean, he's resuscitated the treason charges against Poroshenko. He's been going after Timoshenko, which the U.S. seems oddly like trying to resuscitate this old gas princess hag, right? Evidently she finagled an invitation to Trump's inauguration somehow. But I mean, first of all, she wouldn't be acceptable to Russia. So, Zelensky completely wrote himself out of any possibility. Not only is he a committed Banderite fascist who would be even less amenable to any type of negotiated settlement than Zelensky. I mean, remember, this is the man who had 2 busts of Stepan Bandera and one of Shukovich in his office with the big red and black flag when he was the head of the Ukrainians military. Because one bust of a genocidal Nazi collaborator wasn't enough. You have to have 2 of them, right? And he himself, last week, he spoke at Chatham House, the Royal Institute of International Affairs in the UK. And he said that the Trump administration was destroying the world order, right? So obviously Trump is not going to want to make that guy, and he would be, at least there are polls that, again, take any poll in Ukraine with a big, healthy grain of salt, as far as I'm concerned, but showing that he was more popular, at least in a head-to-head matchup with Zelensky against Zelensky. So, but I mean, he's wrote himself out of possibility. The British may want to put him in. He would suit them just fine. but I don't think the British are going to get to decide who the next ruler of their regime in Ukraine is. And if Zelensky doesn't agree to elections and he controls the security services and the military now, Syrskyi is pretty loyal to Zelensky, throughout this whole conflict, and the same thing with Budanov and the head of the SBU, right? And then who forces him to step down?
Yeah.
Right.
No,
and under what justification do you? I mean, crazy things happen in this world. Al Qaeda takes over Syria, and the EU just accepts the former head of ISIS and Al Qaeda and proclaims him a humanitarian exemplar of democracy and freedom and liberty. So, I mean, crazy things do happen, but Russia would object to most of these things anyway. As far as Russia is concerned, Zelensky is useful, right? Because he's so incompetent. He's so bad at forcing the military to do things for political reasons rather than out of strategic decisions. He's terrible at diplomacy. He grates on just about everyone, right? I think that's why they haven't taken him out, because anyone they might replace him with might be more useful.
Competent.
But I have to be honest. Peace is not in Russia's interests, right? Because there is only one thing that can save this Banderite fascist regime in Kiev right now, and that is Donald Trump. And any peace deal that Donald Trump pushes through will ultimately save a U.S. proxy Banderite fascist regime in Kiev, which is why I am fundamentally opposed to any peace deal that doesn't see this regime ripped out, root and branch, from Kiev and the entirety of Ukraine. And I just can't conceive of any way that is possible without a Russian occupation of Kiev. I can't imagine. I've thought about it, right? How could you lustrate all of these Banderites out of the Ukrainian political sphere, the security services, the military, these US aid NGOs, which, even the Europeans are trying to keep them alive, right? The entire Ukrainian body politic and body social is infected with this cancer. How do you remove it? There is no peace deal to be struck that keeps this regime in Kiev. Maybe they'll change Zelensky out for another figurehead at some point, like Poroshenko was traded out under a sham election for Zelensky. That does not remove the regime, right? They will still have Azov being brought into schools to teach kids.
I'm glad you mentioned this. Boris Johnson, in an honest moment, because they're so few and far between that you get an honest moment with Boris Johnson. Listen to what he says, and I want to get your commentary on this, because you're right.
Yeah, I saw this video already.
Yeah, so Zelensky gets elected on a peace ticket. Boris Johnson is talking about Zelensky dealing with immense agreements and why he couldn't implement the agreements, the international agreements, by the way, that they just entirely blew off.
You got to remember that Volodymyr Zelensky is not he's not an unreasonable guy. He got elected really as a peacenik. He was out that 2019 he tried to do a deal with Putin. As far as I can remember, his basic problem was that the Ukrainians.
No, he can't say the word nationalist.
The compromise, and you can see why not. I mean, you got to remember that
he can't say it. He can't say it.
He couldn't say neo-Nazis, right? He couldn't say Nazis. He couldn't say Banderites, right? That's not in their lexicon. So nationalists, right? I mean, look at reaching for that word there. Oh, it was so it's too funny. Yeah, and he's right? Yeah. So I remember the video, right? Zelensky was elected primarily by East Ukraine, right? As the not Poroshenko who could come to some kind of accommodation with Russia. He was a Russian-speaking ethnic Jew from Krivoy Rog, from, you know, East Ukraine, right? He had made, you know, he had starred, right, in the country in a TV series, which used to be available on Netflix, Servant of the People, right? Which his political party that he created was then named after, as a school teacher who accidentally became the president of Ukraine, and, you know, worked out compromises, right, with Russia, with the West, and everything like that. So people had hope, right? He had done comedy skits mocking the Banderites, right, as part of his comedy troupe, and also playing the piano with his sexual member and all the transvestite, all the other crazy things that he was up to. You can find a video of Zelensky doing a comedy skit on just about anything, right? That will, I mean, it's like finding a Bible quote, right? There's a Bible quote for everything, right? It's like there's a comedy skit that Zelensky did, you know, that points out the irony of everything that has happened since. But he was elected on this. The people of East Ukraine thought that you know, he would bring peace, but he found out when he came into office that the regime that he had, you know, become the president of was built on the Banderite fascists. So, you know, the ones who provided the muscle and the ideological force on the Maidan, that took over the government buildings, right, in Kiev, and cemented their control and forced Yanukovych to flee the city. All right, that formed the battalions that then tried to attack the Donbass and extend the control there when the Ukrainian military refused. Right, and only later would it be purged and brought under control and so on. Right. This is at its heart. It was actually called, in a more honest time, there was an article that admitted that Azov was a neo-Nazi state within a state. And Azov is just one part of a, you know, hundreds of these Banderite battalions and groups and everything. And do you know what publication said that?
Probably New York Times.
Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty.
Did they? Yes. Are you serious?
Check it. Just do a RFERL Azov neo-Nazi state within a state, and it will pop up on Google. Yeah. That was in
they admitted that.
Wow. Something like that. Yeah. It was crazy. Completely, you know, more honest time. So Zelensky actually tried to go to the front line in Donbass and order an Azov commander to pull artillery pieces back beyond the firing range that was mandated, right? That they moved out of firing range as part of one of the initial steps of the Minsk process, the Minsk protocols. And the Azov commander refused, right? And there's video of this, right? And Zelensky was arguing, you know, in Russian, of course, ironically, with this Azov commander. And he's, I'm not some loser off the street. I'm the president of Ukraine, right? Yep. And the commander's like, I don't care who you are. I'm not. And after that, all peace efforts just slowly melted away. And Zelensky turned into, you know, just the figurehead. He internalized all of it, right? Eventually, he has, by all accounts, he fully has, you know, I don't know, we want to consider it Stockholm syndrome or what, but he has come to fully embrace everything in just out of hatred of Russia over this whole affair. And that's what this regime is built on. And until this regime is removed, that Russia's security dilemma and peace in Ukraine will never be achieved. I mean, any government, any reformed government of this regime, even under a peace settlement, right? For all the Russian-speaking, Russian-leaning people of Ukraine outside whatever territory that Russia manages to get out of a supposed peace deal. Do you think they're going to let the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, just start practicing normally again because it's not 100% politically loyal to the regime? Do you think they're going to let pro-Russian politicians in East Ukraine, run for office? Why? I mean, that has been the antithesis of everything they've done since 2014. So until you get rid of this regime, there can never be free and fair elections in Ukraine. There can never be normal politics. There can never be normal life for anyone who doesn't agree, or at least keep quiet and their head down around these Banderite fascists who, ultimately are the vanguard and glue, that keeps this regime in power in Kiev.
And there's a bullet for anybody that is going to sign their name on the dotted line saying, "We surrender."
Speaking of bullets, did you see the execution, the street execution over
did.
the? Yeah,
In
Odessa. There's a prominent neo-Nazi, Ukrainian neo-Nazi, whom himself he worked as a thug for the TCC, for the Ukrainian mobilization press gangs. And he also was one of the organizers of the Odessa massacre. And he was killed. He was gunned down in the
just
street.
say it. There's nothing else to say, right? Somebody popped him.
He was, yeah. So it's interesting who gunned him down. He was gunned down by a senior lieutenant from the Ukrainian military who had been injured in the line of combat 30 times. 30 times. So a patriot, right? A defender of Ukraine. So this guy's adult son, because he's an older guy, right, had been working as a fitness instructor in Odessa. And the Kiev regime's press gangs with this neo-Nazi, right, had come in. Well, first, originally, the press gangs came in because they hunt the fitness centers, like the restaurants, like the nightclubs, whatever, looking for people to press gangs, to grab off the streets and throw into the trenches as meat. And a fitness instructor from there, I think it was also some type of manager there as well, basically told them to get out of there. And he told them in very blunt terms. Well, they came back later with this guy and his thugs, this neo-Nazi, and they abducted him and they took him out to the woods and they beat him and they raped him and they made him take tape of video where he said that he's sorry, he apologizes for everything. These are the real patriots of the country. He also said, I've just taken it up the butt by two guys and I loved it. They made him say that. And that he would be going to the conscription offices in the morning and signing up, right? Obviously not willing. He was all black and blue and bloody, and everything in his underwear while taping this. So he was sent to the front and he died 30 days later. And so this guy's father came back to get revenge on the guy who tortured him, this young guy, his son, and sent him to his death.
Mark,
that's regime. This is why. These are the people that are this regime. And until this regime is removed completely, any peace deal that Trump might theoretically force on Russia is only going to keep this regime alive. And so I will consider to be an evil. Well, the only good thing that Trump can do, as far as I'm concerned, is walk away and blame it all on Biden and Europe and whatever. Anything else he does is going to keep this regime in power in Kiev. And that it's going to erupt back in the conflict again, whether in 30 days, whether in a few months, a few years, whatever. The war will be back on, and maybe the West will be better prepared. Maybe the Europeans will actually spend some of that money building up their militaries over the next few years, which is why Russia has to see this through to the very bitter end now while they can. Whatever nice things Trump may be trying to say about Putin or whatever, they can't let this regime stand.
Now,
right?
you know Putin. You've watched him for years. What do you think he's going to do?
I think he's going to cut. I'm afraid he's going to cut a deal. I don't believe it. Right? Every Russian official, right? Lavrov, Ushakov, Polyansk, everyone you hear, Ryabkov, right? They all say, no ceasefire, no anything. These are our demands and everything. But Putin has caved and agreed to the Minsk protocols 1 and 2, to the Istanbul communique, to all of these other things, and he's been led down the garden path. Putin is not the way they present him in the press, right? No. He's pragmatic and he can be cold-blooded, but he always is perhaps too cautious and he's aware of what Russia's limitations are, perhaps not properly taking into account limitations that the West might have. He's too cautious sometimes. And he always reaches, I believe instinctively, at least up until now, for a diplomatic outcome. Now, he's not done that on a handful of occasions, right? Crimea, in 2014 is one example of that. So, but again, then there was 2 rounds of Minsk and the Istanbul communique. And so, he'll have Trump, this is an opportunity to make good relations with the U.S., blah, 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 blah. We could, fight to the bitter end to the Polish border, and then we have to occupy all of Ukraine, which would be a nightmare in and of itself. And we have to rebuild the country then. And there's a whole lot of argument, and then we'll still have hostile relations with Europe, and in 4 years Trump will be gone anyway, right? And there's no guarantee that the next president won't be another Biden. In fact,
exactly.
Unless it's JD Vance, very likely it would be. So you will have all of this, arguing, because the Kremlin does actually make consensus decisions, right? I mean, in many ways, the Russian Security Council functions like a modern day Politburo, right? On questions like this, right? And increasingly about some domestic matters too. But Putin's voice is still first among non-equals, right? At this table. He's not a dictator, but he does. But I imagine that practically the vast majority of the other people in that room will be telling him, no, see this through to the end now, right? But
he may have a different take.
I don't believe he will. And if he did, right, I would, of course, immediately criticize this and say it's a terrible mistake. So I don't believe he will. Logic and everything tells me he won't. But yeah, I can't get rid of that nagging fear in the back of my head that it won't be a Minsk 3.0, right? I mean, and no matter how many times they say no Minsk 3.0, I still fear it. But I mean, there is no good outcome to this. Not for Russia, not for the US, not for Ukraine. There is no good outcome, because even a Russian total victory, right, still then creates and leaves so many problems in Ukraine, in relations with the West, who rebuilds the country, the cost of it, guerrilla wars, right? All of this, so many problems, right? There's no good outcome. There are only less bad outcomes for all sides on this. And that's simply reality. I mean, if you don't want the black pill, then go listen to some of these other people that have been saying that Russia's going to completely win, every 2 months for the last 3 years, and it's all going to be over, and then Trump and Putin are going to sing Kumbaya together and divvy up the world and all of this nonsense. I'm sorry. I'm too much of a cynic to believe that any of that. I mean, you never, in a situation like this, get everything you want, I mean,
Yeah,
the U.S. overthrew Saddam Hussein in Iraq, and did they get everything they want? An empowered Iran, with influence through Iraq and throughout the region, things never end up perfectly. Russia won the war in Syria, and then they lost the peace,
yeah.
or the
No,
frozen conflict, if you will, thanks
really
to the
good point.
treachery of Erdogan. So things never end up, beautifully
Yeah.
or well. I mean, Mearsheimer called it will be an ugly victory for Russia, and I think that's still
Correct.
the most realistic, most accurate description of what the outcome will be.
Yeah. I've actually, for a few years now, what does this look like in the end? Because I couldn't see it.
It's messy. It looks messy on any way, right? If it doesn't end in World War III, it looks messy.
Yeah.
Right? If it ends in World War III, then we don't have to worry about it anymore.
Yeah, we won't be here. Mark, thank you for this. I always appreciate your breakdowns.
Sorry
Yeah,
for
No, look, you're absolutely right. I guess in my mind, I didn't think they wanted to take all of Ukraine because I didn't think they want to be stuck
they
with
don't
the
want
war.
to take all of Ukraine.
Yeah.
But what
And so then it
if
becomes, okay,
they
well, what is
don't?
the deal?
Then there'll be your NATO troops in it.
Well, see, that's the rub. If you don't, right, exactly. If you don't do it, okay, well, then you're stuck with this Banderas government in place.
Stoltenberg said it outright, right? At one point, no more gray spaces, no more neutral countries, right? That's not allowed anymore, right? In the Cold War, there was Finland and Austria and everything. And then up until 2014, Ukraine had neutrality written into their constitution until the Maidan. But that's not acceptable to the West, or wasn't. What in the Trump era, obviously Europe doesn't agree, and whether the Trump phenomenon will last past 4 years is severely in question. But they don't accept a neutral buffer zone anymore, right? Anything. The logic is, if you ever played the old board game of Risk, if you don't take that spot on the map, then your opponent will take it and use it against you, and use its resources and its people against you. And however bad it is for Russia, and it's bad to have to take all of Ukraine, if they don't take it, then whatever is left will be turned into a ideological Banderite state where every child is trained from birth to hate Russians, right? And they'll be pumped full of arms and everything to be a NATO beachhead against Russia, or right there. That's why this regime can't stand. And I did not believe in Russia moving into West Ukraine at the start of this conflict, but everything the West has done since, and how Kiev has responded, has convinced me that however terrible that is, the only alternative now is even worse.
Mark Sloboda, he's an international relations and security analyst. Mark, where can people find you?
You can find me on Elon Musk's Twitter X at Mark Sloboda1, or on Substack or Telegram at The Real Politique with Mark Sloboda.
Thank you, my man. Always appreciate you. The audience loves you. And yeah, we want the black pill. We want to be told what's real. And you're one of those people who does it. Mark, thank you for this, man. Be safe.
You as well.
Have a good one. Love talking to Mark. I've said before, I could talk to Mark all day. And he tends to be more right, which is why I pay more attention to him when he says stuff. Shout out to him for coming on. Before I close, a couple of more stories. Which leader, quote unquote, of the Democratic Party best reflects its values? Which leader best reflects core values? The Hill seems to believe that honor goes to one AOC, saying that she reflects the Democrats' core values. Now, what is she saying here? I don't know what she's saying in this clip. But
I think there is a deep sense of outrage and betrayal. And this is not just about progressive Democrats. This is across the board, the entire party. I think it is a huge slap in the face.
I understand.
Now, they're saying that AOC is representative of the Democratic Party. Now, when AOC first, yeah, I needed a moment. I needed a moment. When AOC, if you remember, first came onto the political space, her thing is, we need to primary some folks. We need to get these dinosaurs out of the party. And we need to get lefties who can make changes into the way the Democratic Party operates. That was where she started. That is not where she is today. She has been bent in the shape by Nancy Pelosi into something else than what she was when she first got into office. It is wild to me that a party with a 29% rating in one sense, 27% in another sense, still doesn't know what it is. That is shocking to me that a major political party in the United States can't define itself. It has no clue as to what it is in a core value sort of way, in a way where they can articulate, this is what we are, this is what we represent, this is what we stand for. That is rather astonishing. It is also astonishing to me that that same political party would go to someone like AOC. When AOC first got into office, her position on Gaza and Israel was very similar to what ours, the audience, myself, would be. When she first got into the political party, this idea of getting various Democrats out because she believed that the party needed to fundamentally change. And for all of this acknowledgement of anger, legitimate anger at the Democratic Party for not being able to win, for not being representative of those core values, she follows and toes the Democratic line every bit as much as any other random Democrat on any particular vote that needs to take place. Even on the vote for increasing the $15 an hour minimum wage. If you remember, they backed away after putting up a token resistance the first time around. The second time around, they backed down. Even on the issue of war, what the lefties put out, hey, maybe we should be working for peace. They got shouted down and within one day, repudiated their own position on that issue. So if she is the person that they are saying that this is the representative of the core values of the Democratic Party, I am still stuck with the reality that I don't know what that means. I don't, not in real terms. This is not a come to Jesus. This is not an acknowledgement of failure. This is not an acknowledgement that they need to change. This is an acknowledgement where they think messaging is the issue. It is not AOC. I don't know what they are. And, if you ask them, what do you represent? I don't think they have an answer for it. 3 a.m. between them and their God in an honest sense. So yeah, I'm bitching about this because it is shocking to me that a major political party that is supposed to represent certain working class issues, meaning it should be built into it. It's in the bricks, or at the very least, it should be in the bricks. It's not in the bricks. I don't mean the bricks organization. I mean, it should be in the bricks of what they represent, this worker class stuff that they don't. And saying, well, we think the core values are represented by AOC, somebody who effectively towed the line of the Democratic Party all the way through for the last several years. I'm stuck with having no clue what that means in real terms. And now they're saying that Rahm Emanuel is running for president. Rahm Emanuel. The same Rahm Emanuel, by the way, that was mayor of Chicago and was mayor of Chicago when Flint, Michigan came out, found out they had lead in their water that their people had been drinking. Rahm Emanuel does a test for Chicago because he's like, hey, we need to know whether Chicago has lead. We see that Michigan has lead. We need to see about Chicago. Come to find out, it wasn't the result that Rahm Emanuel wanted. He was shocked to find out that kids in Chicago were drinking lead water, and he buried the results because he didn't want to do anything about the reality of the fact that the people in Chicago were drinking lead in their water. That is the guy who they're now saying is going to run for president of the United States for the Democratic Party. And you're telling me that your core, the people who you consider to be your core, is AOC? How do you get this disparity? How does this work? How do you get somebody like Rahm Emanuel and they say, okay, this is the guy that's going to run. This is going to be the standard bearer for the Democratic Party. And then you ask the party, hey, what do you think your core? And they say, well, we think it's something like AOC. How does that work? How does that work? I don't know how that works. I just don't know how that works. I should have hit this with Mark, and I'm going to have to get somebody to talk about it tomorrow. Mark did bring it up. Trump, the man of peace himself, has given the green light for Netanyahu to attack and break the ceasefire. Now, let's be very clear. The ceasefire was being broken by Israel all the way through. Hamas wanted to move to the second layer of the ceasefire deal. Netanyahu, who was not honoring the first phase of it, goes back to a bombing campaign, killing nearly 400 people in 24 hours. Nearly 400 people in 24 hours. The devastation is obviously ungodly. Trump has backed it. Netanyahu has backed it. Trump has also gone on a bombing campaign in Yemen. And once again, MAGA seems to be okay with this because Donald Trump is the one that's doing it. So the man of peace has opened up war on multiple fronts. The reality of it is he's not going to get what he wants for Yemen because Yemen has been bombed for God knows how long and has not changed tenor or behavior in the bombing of either Saudi Arabia or in the bombings under Joe Biden, with the United States being the lead in those bombings. Trump has escalated this, effectively saying that the Houthis in Iran are like a one-to-one. Now, this argument is treacherous and problematic, right? If indeed that's true, that if Iran is indeed arming the Houthis and that anything the Houthi does are a result of Iran, okay, well, what does it mean for people that the U.S. has been arming around the globe? Taiwan, Ukraine, for God's sake. That would mean that the U.S. is at war with Russia. This argument is kind of treacherous to make in this case. If Trump is legitimately talking about attacking Iran, I would argue his presidency is over. How do you do that? What do you use for that? What armaments are you going to use with that? And more importantly, what is the Iranian response? Because whatever attack you're going with, they will respond. And they have to respond. And are you, as president of the United States, willing to take the economic consequences of them blowing up either military bases that belong to the United States and the number of U.S. servicemen that are going to be killed in that, or with them taking down oil and gas for the world, both of which they have the military capability of doing? It's not about winning a war. It's about biting you hard enough where you bleed and it hurts. And I'm pointing out that, A, you can't win a war with them in a sense, because I don't believe you're going to have this military buildup where you're putting boots on the ground, where you don't get what you want in Iraq, but you're going to go after a country that's 3 times its size. Yes, you have the capability of bombing, but they have the capability of response, which is beyond the human lives that you want to extinguish. You're going to have to deal with fallout and consequences that's going to suck your presidency down a hole. Now, is Trump okay with that? Is Trump ready for that? Now, part of the conversation that Donald Trump wants to have with Russia, believe it or not, goes beyond Russia into other areas, such as Iran, because Russia and Iran have a, let's say, a political, diplomatic, military, and economic relationship. So I would not be shocked if part of the conversation that Trump is having with Putin will trend into Iran, considering the threats that Trump is leveling towards Iran and the threats that Iran is leveling back at the United States. My point is that the man of peace is now fighting or opening fronts on 2 wars, with a third being threatened with Iran. This would destroy Trump's presidency. Mark my words. I don't believe it's going to happen, but my beliefs don't matter. The threats are being leveled, and some reconciliation would have to take place. The catch and the problem is that the reconciliation needs to take place in Gaza, a deal that Trump negotiated and a deal that Trump should have pushed Netanyahu into accepting. But the Israeli first president, Donald Trump, doesn't do that. And even when there were diplomatic channels being opened up behind the scenes where Trump was trying to reach out to Hamas, that person gets outed by Israel because Israel didn't like the fact that the U.S. was trying to make treaties for Hamas to have direct negotiations, and eventually fired. So the guy that was trying to get a deal and solidify a deal was cut loose because he was apparently trying to work directly with Hamas. An Israel first president, Donald Trump. Israel is our issue in this case. The threat to civil liberties is coming from the association with Israel. The threat to dragging us into a larger war is because of the association with Israel. Donald Trump has an Israel first problem. And I know a lot of people, this conversation of whether it's the dog wagging the tail or the tail wagging the dog, whichever one it is a recipe for destroying the First Amendment and, more importantly, destroying Donald Trump's presidency and whatever he's trying to attempt with this presidency. You need to get that dog on a leash. The dog needs to be dragged onto a leash. Before I close it, let me go to my audience. I want to give a shout out to the chat. We have a new member. I think this is called Sherry's. Welcome to the family, Sherry's. Welcome to the family. Justice. Yes, $100 million from Miriam Adelson. What he's talking about is when Donald Trump was running in the race, Donald Trump got a ton of money from Israeli sources, one of which being Miriam Adelson, who apparently gave him $100 million. Now, from my understanding, he didn't get the entirety of this money. I think it ended up being $40 million. It's still $40 million. It's an astonishing sum of money. Here's another one. There's a new American empire rising. I think we're seeing an empire dying. I don't think we're seeing an empire rising. The reason why I say that, we can't even pass a budget in this country. That is something basic. I think countries get to a point where in the very beginning, there's a huge amount of revolutionary fervor. There's true believers in whatever those values that they claim to espouse. 200 years in, less so. Less so. I think it's less so. Right here, Tom. Door is boring now with the coked up comedian around him. See, I haven't watched Door in 8 years or more. It's been a while. I don't know who's around him, which is a coked up comedian. I don't know who's around him. So I can't really comment on it. Adriana Black, an ex-dog of mine later chewed off its tail for health reasons, and someone watching him got him to the vet, so he survived self-surgery. Jesus Christ. General Choi, in 2028, 2032, Donald Trump Jr. will be selected for POTUS. I don't buy it. I don't buy it. I mean, look, the reality of it is, if you had a functioning political system with a functioning political party that was even looking halfway out for the Americans' interests, Trump doesn't win. He doesn't even get to the political space. It is the failure of the political class that Donald Trump wins and is in office. And he is, on some level, a punishment to the other political classes for failing in their political space. Trump and a person like him would have been unheard of just 10 years ago in our politics. I mean, Hillary Clinton running under an FBI investigation was odd for our political space. It was something that, all things being equal, you could never have gotten into that level with an FBI investigation because it's too damaging that you have an FBI investigation covering you. Like I'm saying, the main body of the political space collapsed. And with that collapse, you got new figures added to the political space. Trump on the Republican side, but you should have ended up with Sanders on the Democrat side with the idea that the two wings of the political class bump, fight, winner, and that winner is now the new orientation of the political space. Well, Democrats had all sorts of mechanisms in order to ensure that it was Sanders. Republicans had no such mechanism, in which case Trump wins. The wings versus the most establishment candidate in an area where the public wanted something fundamentally different. Even if they thought he was incompetent, even if they thought he wasn't qualified, they still voted him in. It's punishment, in a sense. Be better. Now, do they get the message? No, they have not gotten the message. And in their minds, they think, well, Trump will overreach, and we could stand there and point to Trump and say, hey, there's a disaster, and the public will put us back in. That's what they think. That's what they think for the midterms. I don't want them to win under that model. You must understand, I want them to win under a model where they're fundamentally different. And until they reach the model where they're fundamentally different and they're worth a damn, they will get ungodly criticism from me. Complete criticism. Nobody should support the party under those terms. Right here. Yemen is not Iran and will operate on itself. Trump threats only implies impotence on Yemen. Yes. Yes, that's true. That's true. They can't control Yemen. They haven't been able to control Yemen, going back to Saudi Arabia, giving the green light to bomb them under Obama. That's the other thing, right? The JCPOA. So, and I'll close it on this. When Obama was in office, Obama wanted to get the JCPOA going because at the time, the thought was it's either going to be a war or it's going to be a deal. The JCPOA was the way in the people's mind at the time was to avoid a war. Okay. In order to get the JCPOA, Obama was talking to Saudi Arabia, who was on the outs with Iran. And Obama was like, okay, I don't want Saudi Arabia involving itself in my peace deal. And I don't want them making us think about it. What Saudi Arabia wanted was a green light to attack Yemen. Obama, believing that this was going to be a bloody campaign and that it was not going to work out the way Saudi Arabia wanted, still gave the green light for them to go on a bombing campaign against Yemen with the idea that I need them to stay out of my deal. They will go bombing, but they will leave me to my devices and making this deal with Iran. So even back then, the Houthis on some level was related to Iran in regards to the deal. The catch, though, is that the Houthis often say we are independent actors. What we do is not directly related to what Iran, meaning Iran is not controlling us in the way that is always, the association is always made. And as I pointed out, it is a treacherous argument to make that if Iran gives weapons or military technology or know-how to Yemen, that Iran is directly related to anything that Yemen does, considering we give our technological know-how to people who are directly engaged in a conflict with Russia. How do we make that case? How do we really make that argument? We'll see if Trump makes it and goes through with it. Wanda Ive, MAGA is not okay with war, not very good optics for Putin, so would vote for Trump, MP, hate Democrats, and Obama. Yes, yes, yes. MAGA is okay with war, though. Meaning, we'll see. We'll see. I think in regards to the Houthis, they seem to be okay with it. I could be wrong. I could be wrong. I mean, I know a lot of lefties are pointing this out saying, whoa, what are you doing? How are you this man of peace while you are attacking Yemen when the issue is Israel? I guess the catch becomes how much of MAGA is honest? And they're pointing out, how are you a man of peace and you're now attacking Yemen? Your issue is Israel. Deal with Israel. It seems that many of MAGA are okay with this, or okay with the bombings in Palestine, okay with the bombings on Yemen. I could be wrong. If I'm wrong, tell me. But I don't think I am. I don't think I am. All right, I'm going to end this. How's that wall coming along? Well, the wall will be changing soon because I will be moving on the 23rd. In fact, I'm probably not going to be here on Monday because I'm going to be in transit to my new hotel, or the very least where I'm going to be living for the next couple of months, maybe even 3. I've scheduled to stay at that place for 2 months. If it's 3, I will give you a heads up. I'm sick of moving. I'm all over the place. But, to be fully transparent, my issue and the reason why you're seeing me in hotel, Airbnb. So, after the radio station collapsed or the network was closed down by sanctions, I moved back to Richmond because the thought was, all right, well, there's no point in me being in DC if the radio station is gone, because that was my only reason for being there. So I may as well come back home. When I got back home, I think this was in November, December. It was like, okay, now what? You need to get somewhere to stay. But then there was a question of, okay, well, Trump won. Now that Trump won, okay, what's going to happen to the radio station? Are they going to end the war? And if they end the war, is the station coming back? And if the station comes back when they end the war, if you are in DC or if you're in Richmond, how does that work? So it puts me in limbo. This channel is not changing. I'm going to continue my show. The show is going to continue at pace. No change. In fact, the show is my priority. Just to be very clear. But I can do both. And the catch becomes, all right, if you lock yourself down in Richmond for a year, if the radio station comes back in 5 months or 4 months, then what? It's that. I'm stuck in a box, not knowing what is going to take place in regards to any kind of deal that's going to be made. The deal seems like it's going to be made. Where does that place the station? I don't have an answer. And so it leaves me in limbo. And because it leaves me in limbo, I need to find a penalty box for a few months in order to stay while all of this plays out. Full transparency. That's where I am. So the next place I stay, I'm going to be there for at least 2 months, maybe 3, in which case I don't have to keep moving all around. I would just be in a fixed location. That's my objective. That is what's coming up on the 23rd. So if you don't see me on the 24th, it's why. You will see me on the 25th. So what's most likely going to happen, the next show that week is going to be on the 25th. Just full transparency. All right, I'm going to end this. I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, I'm going to say subscribe. I want to thank all of you. We are growing. We are trying to hit 50K. We are a ball of energy, ball of lightning headed towards 50K. We're almost there. Thank all of you for it. I think that's all. I think that's all my announcements. Trying to think if there's anything else. You can support this work through PayPal, Patreon, Super Chats, memberships. These shows are typically demonetized, so your support makes the show what it is, and your support is deeply appreciated. You all have a fantastic day. Japley, welcome to the channel. Thank you. Thank you. Sam, back at you. Thank you. Jamal Thomas Morning Show. It's a little bit early, but that's okay. Signing off. You guys have a phenomenal day. I'll see you tomorrow, bright and early, 7 a.m., 10 a.m. Thomas Morning Show. Have a good one. All be safe.